everybody. Hello. Just let me know if y'all can see and hear me super quick. I didn't hit the... No, I did hit the start button. Okay.
Great start to the stream there,
okay.
Sotek. It's almost like your mind is in other places. I don't know, with lovely wrapped presents picked out with I appear to be getting some sound issues.
Okay, it's not on my side.
Let me just edit.
Oh, okay. Now I can't hear you at all. Okay, you're good. Okay, I'll go ahead and we'll swing into it. But hello, everyone. Good to see you all. I do appreciate all the sweet birthday messages. Really appreciate those very, very much. Thank you for the kind words. Tomorrow is my actual birthday, but you know how stream stuff works. We're celebrating all this nonsense the day before. But I will be turning an ancient, truly revered 32. But that's not really why we're here today. We're mainly here today to continue our chat about the old world. Nicely done. And dive into a bunch of the lore alterations. And I do want to take a quick moment before I cover a lot of the little things that y'all are sending in, which I really appreciate, by the way, everyone. That something I wanted to say is that you might have seen in the comments, if you looked at the last Lorebeards, that overall, we are having a lot of fun with this. Granted, we're gonna sound really bitchy because it's gonna be easier for us to be like, oh, well, this hasn't changed and we still like it. So moving on, there's nothing really new to say, but this is different. And is it good different or bad different? So if it sounds like, man, they really hate it, it's probably not nearly as bad as it sounds. Granted, there's some things we're kind of like, ugh, but for the most part, it's interesting. We were just talking before the stream started, and I agree a lot with Andy, where I feel like every time I've read it, I feel different. Like the first time I read it, I was like, oh, this is great. And then the second time I was like, you know what, never mind. And then the third time I was like, oh, wait, no, I do actually like these bits. And then the fourth time it was like, oh, this is trash. And it's like every time I go through, there's something different that leaps out at me. But it's an interesting experience, but that's what makes it fun to talk about.
I agree completely. I'm before we actually get diving in, let's let everybody roll up and pull in and pull up a pew and get their party hats on for good old Sotek's birthday, which I am going to bring up because happy birthday to you. But we'll get to that in a moment. I am in exactly the same place. I've now read the initial sections inside the book. So that's basically all the intro stuff, which I still find a bit weird that it's at the beginning because this is a rule book, which makes the rules harder to access because you've got to plow through
halfway through the rules.
Yeah, it's really weird. But regardless of the very odd ordering, I've gone through a host of different versions of myself in terms of what I think of it. To begin with, I was like, oh, you know what? Other than a few bits here or there, this is not so bad. It's done this, it's done that. I like this. They pulled it all together. And I was, broadly speaking, positive. And I think that's something that I'd like to reaffirm concerning what Sotek just said there. In general, that is how I feel. I really quite like this. But, and I'm going to put a very heavy but on this, the very purpose of this stream is to discuss changes, and changes by their very nature involve things moving from one state into a new state and not staying the same or consolidating things together that were already consolidated. They were just in different books. So those are the things which are often in the majority that we could be talking about, but that's not the purpose of the stream, which would be super positive because we'd say all of this rocks. What we're talking about is the changes, and changes are sometimes done purposefully, sometimes they're done by mistake, sometimes they're done in ignorance, and we're here to analyze what we think about each of these changes. And often, particularly the changes we think don't make a great deal of sense, it will come across somewhat negatively, somewhat bitchy, and I do apologize for that in advance. The last stream, I did not expect to be anywhere near as negative as it was, but by the time we hit the timeline, we're basically pulling out our guns and blowing shit out of it. Having ourselves quite a bit of a laugh at the same time, but nevertheless, it came across really negative, and I would like to reinforce that we actually really like the book.
Yeah.
It's made some odd choices, but we do love it.
I'm not going to apologize for being negative. Y'all know what you signed up for coming in here.
No, it's nice to apologize at least once. Right, so before we begin, let's pull up some of your lovely birthday messages for good old Sotek. let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to begin.
Yep. Laughing God, thank you very much. It is going to be filled with a lot of lore. I'm actually going to finally sit down and read through Lords of the Lance today. I've been super busy and not been able to do it, but today it's like I can, after I get all the stuff I got to get done, that is going to be my evening, is just reading. So I'm really looking forward to that. Aaron Schreiber, thank you. Yes, the forked tongue be upon us all. Much better comment. I prefer the comment of the forked tongue. Much better. Happy birthday, may beard grow longer. God, I wish. It is being a bitch about it. Czar, thank you very much. I really appreciate the generosity. Schwartz, thank you for the notes. Tarmakan, it'd be nice to see Tarmakan. He's in such an awkward place of, it would be so nice to see the Thrones of Chaos series finished, because it was supposed to be a quadrilogy, but I don't think they're ever going to release it. I'm sure it's already done, but it wouldn't make sense for them to release it, to be honest. But hey, you never know. Maybe they'll use some of the characters from Total War maybe one day. Sean, how many pages are we going to get through? 15? I suspect we'll get much further today, because the timeline is relatively dense with a small amount of text, whereas everything else is just like paragraphs, but we'll see what happens. Hammond, thank you very much, especially from the TGI Friday crew. Yep, nice. Good old TGI Fridays. And Mandatus, thank you for the super generous 8888.
Thank you, Mandatus.
We appreciate that very much. Yes, I have seen the gnome. If we have time, we will talk about the gnome when we get to it. And Hammond just spamming all the frickin' emotes. Thank you very much. And really appreciate all the super crazy generosity, guys, and all the memberships and all that other crazy stuff, and all the subs on Twitch and everything. Thank you all very, very much. I super duper fucking appreciate it.
Just pick up a couple of cheers. Oh, sorry. I thought you were done there. Just pick up a couple of cheers when you're sliding by.
Tell Nakai to bring the birthday paddle. That's gonna be a no from me, dog. That's a big old fucking gator. I'm not getting hit by that shit. And Hammond just having a foodie moment there.
That's because it's a party.
Okay, that would make more sense. Ryan, thank you very much. I appreciate the sweet message, man. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that so much. And Hyles, good to see you. And glory to the best city of the empire. Oh, Hyles being the Nolan simp over there. He's from my my Wolfrup campaign.
That makes a lot more sense. Right, so much like we did in the previous streams, because we think it provides us with a good rhythm, we're not going to be taking the super chats as they come in. We're going to take them in batches as we work our way through the various sections of the book that we're going to cover today. We are, much like last time, going to be going through it in page order. So if you want to follow along with us, we'll be starting on page number 31, and we're going to start kicking ass and chewing gum from that point onwards, which is...
Andy, that sounded like such a college lecture. If you want to follow along, open your books and turn to page 31.
Turn to page 31. And who's going to do the reading out today? Who am I going to embarrass? You there at the back.
Yeah, who's not making eye contact?
Yep. So, looking forward to this one, because these sections start delving into the individual factions, some of which haven't had much detail in the past, some of which are completely missing, which is also interesting in and of itself. And the facts that are offered are an interesting synthesis of what came before, clearly the slightly new direction they've gone for, and also some of the more obscure pieces of lore that they've dropped in, which are often not used in Warhammer, but are used in all of the other properties that might be out there. We'll be going through those too. So this, I feel, is going to be quite a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we're just going to fly right into it. So starting with War and Conquest, we get they very much speedrun the entire relationship of the elves and dwarves in this section.
They do.
Into four little segments, which is an impressively small amount of text. So elves and dwarves, we get some notes that the dwarves are heading up into, they're expanding up the World's Edge Mountains, and they start heading into Zorn Uzkul and making their way over to the Mountains of Mor. Meanwhile, Phoenix King Belshazzar takes over, and the High Elves the elves are exploring the world, and they start settling along the coastlines. And one thing that I do like, which is cool, is that we do get some specifics that they didn't need to call out, but it's just kind of fun for world building about where the elves and the dwarves re-encounter one another, which is along the coast of Bretonnia, which makes sense. That's where a lot of the elven colonies were. And dwarves, you got the Grey Mountains there, though funny enough, the Grey Mountain holds wouldn't really be fully established till way later. But there were a lot of mines out there. And then we get some notes about the one thing I don't like about this section, because it just talks about like the elves and the dwarves becoming friends, and they both benefit very heavily, is they do go out to say like, oh, Belshazzar the Phoenix King goes to visit the dwarves, which I personally don't really consider important. I think it's way more important to focus on Malerion's relationship with the dwarves, which they do mention in the last sentence, where they're like, oh yeah, the Anarian or Malerion, who's Malekith for those out of the circle on that, is made the ambassador and trusted friend to the dwarves, which almost seems to imply it implies the relationship backwards, where it's supposed to be that Malerion or Malekith is the one who actually encountered the dwarves and built that relationship with them, and Belshazzar just kind of showed up and it was a political stunt, but like Belshazzar only met the dwarves once, and that was it. Whereas Malerion has this whole saga about it, and they kind of, I don't know, I don't like the wording of this.
I am going to reaffirm that and say nod, agree, and add to it. The depiction of Malerion inside the Elves and the Dwarves first section is very much what you'd expect from someone who wants to make Malerion nothing but evil. Pure evil is secondary to the good guys. The good guys are doing their good guy stuff. Oh, Malerion's in the background. And this is reaffirmed as we go on to the next section, which is the seeds of treachery. I hate this. Now, I don't hate it because it's telling any events that didn't happen. It's basically the story of Malerion, the fallout with the dwarves, the fallout with the next Phoenix King and his attempt to kill the next Phoenix King. But everything that was noble and good about Malekith, as he had been previously described, the good side of him that came from, let's say, his father, if you desperately wish to try and assign it in such a fashion, but I don't think that that's worthwhile either. He was touring the world, doing good things for the elves, really making a massive difference. He came back, he attacked the pleasure cults, and when he found out what the source of those cults were, as we know, there were issues. But that's not how it's portrayed here. Indeed, I would argue in this version, you could very much believe that he was responsible for the pleasure cults. He wanted Ulthuan to be breaking down. He was treacherous to his core. The words they use, his deep jealousies, the fact that he's evil to his core, is repeatedly not just said here, but over the course of the next couple of paragraphs. Malerion is not just simplified, he is made a caricature of a person. He's almost comically evil. Everything that he does looks ridiculously overwrought, and when he attempts it, fails in catastrophic fashion, because all they focus on is his great evil deeds and his failures. And it really looks awful. If you are out there going, so I want to play Dark Elves, you wouldn't want to upon reading this because he's an idiot. And I think it does no justice at all for the character. I won't go into any of the great depths of exactly what it goes into, other than it goes through the story as we know it. There's not any real changes other than they only focus on the negative parts and skip all of the positive. So they have clearly chosen that Malerion is evil. And that, given where he's going to end up in the end times, and also given the character we've had, is such a simplification that it's almost appalling for me.
Yeah, well, and to me, like, it almost feels like a high elf politicist wrote this section, which is so weird. And granted, I understand if if you're looking at it purely from a perspective of like, well, the Dark Elves aren't really like a playable faction. We're not worried about them. We just want to get the high elf perspective and be done with it. But even then, like, it strips away a lot of the complexity about what makes the high elves the high elves. To leave out that, like, it
Malerion is a high elf, is an elf, just like the rest of them at this point. He is no better or worse. And they all have their ups and their downs, deeply emotional creatures that they are. But he is painted black.
Yeah,
as evil as you can get. It's
the
awful.
thing that super sucks about it is that, and this includes the next paragraph as well, or the next section, which is the Sundering section.
Yeah,
is that
it does.
they make out Malerion to be so over the top maniacal evilness without, and there's no mention of like Marathi or any of those other shenanigans, which is weird. Like
really
they
weird.
bring up a lot of the Phoenix Kings, which once again, I guess from a High Elfin perspective, but like the fact that they don't even mention Marathi, and they actually leave out a lot of really important quotes from the older lore that I really like, where if you read through the Seeds of Treachery and the Sundering, there's no mention of the really classic lines of like, the war was such a war among elves, and it was such a deeply rooted issue that it was brother versus sister, mother versus daughter, father versus son. Like, there's no mention of any of that. Like, the section almost comes off more like it was a very small group of elves that sided with Malerion as he, you know, did his little coup, but there's no exploration or mention of why the Sundering happened other than it being like, oh, Malerion was an asshole, which just isn't. It's so much more complex than that.
He is portrayed as if he's in the wrong, utterly and completely, rather than someone who believed he was doing all the right things and then was tipped to a tipping point and made some mistakes. He's not given a tragic flaw, so to speak. Well, he wouldn't be still alive. But he is simple, really black and white simple. And they've gone for such a basic version of him that at the end of it, I was left just going, really? This is what you're doing with arguably one of the better characters that Warhammer offers? The bad guys are super important in how they're presented. But if he's just a cackling, maniacal, malefic, evil sorcerer, and everybody that followed him was evil, then you've got a massive problem in just basically understanding human or indeed elven nature. I will also add that I did find one repeated use of a word a bit weird, and that's the use of the word cosmic for wherever they're referring to the vortex. It pops up more than once, and I find it a bit of an odd choice of a descriptor, because cosmic is ultimately space, and it's not a space vortex at all. I mean, if you want, it's an etheric vortex in that it's dragging magic back into the aether. If you're using elven terminology, or if you desperately want, there's a variety of other terms you could use for the immaterial warp, realm of chaos, realm of the divine gods, or whatever that lies beyond. But cosmic, it isn't. And I found it every single time I read it, my brain just stuck in it going, cosmic, the cosmic vortex? Are they changing it? That was my first thought, because words mean things. And they've clearly gone for like the ancient cosmic evils of Cthulhu or some similar nonsense. But even there, it means something in terms of what those massive entities are. Here in Warhammer, cosmic, what? But it means space, right? Or am I utterly confused?
It just feels like a lazy use of
cosmos.
the word.
Yeah, it does. It's just a bit of an odd one.
And then skipping on just to the War of the Beard section. The War of the Beard section is very just like it's to the point. Like it's not particularly exciting, but there's nothing crazy in it. It's just like, dwarves, elves fight, the end.
Right. So as we finish this first section, I'm going to give my first editing comment. I think they should have just repeated what Warhammer 8 did. And by that, I mean they should have just sunk the timelines in to each of their sections. It would have made more sense. It would have made it easier to follow. You could have used the same dating system with a nice little box out explaining it, rather than having this weird timeline in the middle that both takes the stuff that comes before and the stuff that comes after. We could have had War and Conquest there with the War of the Beard bits, and then underneath it, they have a huge gap they could have filled up with a nice little timeline section going through the War of the Beard core components. And they could have even added in a couple of important details like, Malekith, Malerion, makes first contact, makes bestest bud friends with he who will one day become Grombrindle, although we don't need to necessarily say that. There's lots of things that they could have sewn in here that they didn't. So loosely, I think the timeline is really badly mismanaged in this book, and it also makes it more difficult to access the information. I don't think as much thought was given to it as was given to previous editions of Warhammer.
I would agree. Well, and it feels like they kind of copied the concept of the 8th edition timeline from that core rulebook, but just did it worse, because that book was better about how it kind of divided the page vertically or horizontally rather, and like the top section was more paragraphs, and then the bottom section was timeline stuff that was going on during the top stuffs. Like the top stuff was like, this was the important things happening during this era, and the bottom section was like, here's a bunch of fun little random timeline things along the bottom.
Was it 7th that dropped it into the margins as well, the timeline sections? I always get my 7th and 8th mixed up.
I think 8th did both.
Did 8th drop them in? I think
there were two different sections.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's it for the War of the Beard. We get ourselves 4 paragraphs, and in those 4 paragraphs, we learn that the High Elves, as they will become, are they actually marked? So the Elves of Ulthuan, as they're marked here, the Elves of Ulthuan meet up with the dwarves, but because of the cackling evil of Malerion, it all falls apart, and there's a civil war, all because of the cackling evil of Malerion, who, by the way, is treacherous, planned to assassinate Belshazzar right from the beginning because he was jealous, bitterly disliked him, all manner of stuff that largely contradicts what comes in the various novels and stories that we have before. He is made into a very simple character who is basically pure evil, and that is deeply disappointing, and I think speaks to the new direction that this game is taking, which is directly marked right on the front of the books, where we see the forces of good, or alternatively, if we go to the other side, the forces of evil. They actually think that wood elves are good.
Yeah, we'll get to a section later where it's like well, we'll get to it when we get to it. I don't want to go off on a tangent because then I'm going to do it again when we get to that section. So I'll just leave
before we do a tangent. Why don't we grab up the super chats to sit in between, eh?
Yeah, that's good.
You know where we were last. I have no idea.
and that's literally all for Malerion in this book. Malerion, other than the name change, the Malerion stuff sucks. Just
yeah, it does. I mean, I'm happy with the name change. I've said it more than once. I'm totally cool with it. I think it makes sense. The character change into becoming something that is basically a simple mustache twirling kids evil guy is just sad.
Lame.
It is lame.
It just makes the character less interesting, which makes the High Elves immediately less interesting, which is something I don't think they really got. Okay. Thank you very much, Aaron. And Sotek, YouTube will call a truce with Twitch. No, I like when you guys bully each other. It amuses me. Fight.
Happy birthday.
Necrodancer Cobalt, question about last stream regarding the heck. Do you think they're invoking the real world Egyptian pharaohs who were notorious for erasing their predecessors' names and replacing with their own, but it's all Cetra? I don't. I like that, but I think in the case of the Nehekarans, when it comes to Nehek in particular, I think Cetra would be much more the kind of individual to specifically call out Nehek and to use that legacy to really lean on the fact that Nehek was the reason Khemri was established as the City of Kings, and take that on as a mantle that he is then co-opting for himself, as opposed to replacing with himself. Otherwise, he would have changed the name of the nation, which he doesn't.
And I'll also say that when the Egyptians did that, it was generally because that they had some deep religious or political difference with them who came before. So, for example, Pharaoh Akhenaten, who believed very much in one god, the Aten, replacing all of the gods in their great pantheon that they had before. And then those who came afterwards, replacing all of them again and wiping out Akhenaten, wiping out pretty much his entire family from all of their records, making it very hard to study them. And I think that, yes, there probably would be some of that down there, but I don't think the case here by any stretch, because Cetra is very much building upon what came before. He's not attempting to say what came before should be forgotten. If that was the case, it would be called Cetracara, for example.
Yeah. That being said, like Andy said, I would agree that there are definitely Tomb Kings, individual Tomb Kings, that have probably done that to other Tomb Kings. That probably happens a lot.
Yep.
Doom Rider. If Malekith is now Malerion, what's his dragon name now? His dragon will probably still be called Seraphon, because the only reason they changed Malekith's name is for legal reasons. Like, they didn't change it because they didn't like the name. They changed it because they didn't want to share a name with another popular character that they don't own.
That they completely lifted the name from.
Yeah, that they stole. Yeah. From.
Yeah.
Sean Salt's character growth is taboo right now. I mean, they're ups and downs, but yeah.
Yes. Good are good and evil are evil in this game, and that appears to be the direction they're going in, which I imagine is going to be completely blown apart by novels, because novels in the end always add shades of grey, or there's going to be little in the way of conflict other than the big bad guy over the horizon. And conflict is a constant driver of stories, and that conflict is often the next duke you meet and the next person or whomever. Yeah, it's just no.
Yeah, it's so weird because like in 8th edition they had the better system, which still wasn't perfect, but it was better, of order and destruction. But they were really clear in those books that these guys are not good nor are they evil. They have different overall motivations, even though the system wasn't super well applied because you had stuff like Dark Elves being destruction, which they kind of tried to explain, but it was not an easy definition. But
it was weak.
Yeah, they had like something that vaguely worked. This system where they're like, oh, they're good and evil is very lazy, and if you look at it for more than like 30 seconds, you go, that doesn't work. And we'll get to a section later where they're going to immediately turn around and be like, no, this isn't actually good, while using the term forces of good, which is very odd.
It really is.
The guy that wrote the Malerion lore is the dude who burned his Dark Elf army.
I think you might be right.
Yeah, that guy actually lives near my area. It was like a huge meme for a good while. Words of Chaos section of the Ravening Horde states that the Chaos Rune Swords are made by a dwarf named Grugni Ironheart. Was that established previously? That was established by the Vermintide developers. For the free it was a DLC. The one about the big Nurgle rune sword. Which, hey, great, cool. That they're leaning on that. Because if you go further back, there is some other old lore that says that Alaric the Mad made them. And I kind of prefer this version because Alaric the Mad wasn't usually considered mad because he felt a chaos. It was more due to the pursuit. He had a really bad case of obsession.
Yeah, massively obsessed.
To the point that he made all the other dwarves really uncomfortable, and he was willing to do things that, from a dwarf perspective, violated a lot of the ways they like to do things traditionally, which is why he got called the Mad. It wasn't because he necessarily felt a chaos. Whereas Blight Reaper is like a full-on Nurgle Chaos Blade forged by a dwarf, and the Vermintide devs were like, okay, we're going to make our own character for this. And I think it works better that way.
So established character, yes.
Yeah. Viper Code, I love you guys picking this part. I only ever knew the Total War games, but you both helped me love this world. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, thanks.
Let's see. Portions of the old world rulebook read as narrator, yet other paragraphs are first person, so I headcanon this was a human taught by a jaded high elf.
Yeah, I do. I didn't want to bring up another editing comment, but I have some significant editing issues throughout this book in terms of how they use their person and also how they select their descriptors. Sometimes it's almost comical rather than necessarily trying to reinforce the cool characters that they have. Some of the words are,
It feels, I say this with love to my fellow Americans, but sometimes it feels like an American fantasy author rather than like the old like Warhammer ones.
Like it's like D&D.
Well, where the descriptors...
But even that's got massive complexity now.
Yeah, where like even the descriptors they use are not necessarily used well. Anyway, Lindsay, and I will say that, hi Lindsay, by the way. I will say, the thing that's really weird to me personally about Malerion is that in Age of Sigmar, Malerion is super fucking complicated. He's a very mysterious character. Like, they've been building him up now for almost 10 years. And they go really out of their way to be like, yes, he is one of the elven gods. He is one of the order characters. He was on the pantheon of order, but he is sinister as fuck. But not in a way where he's like he's opposed to chaos. He's a great builder of civilization. He's a very important nexus point in the fight against ruination and destruction and all these other forces. But the way he does things is really interesting. Where like he gave Sigmar one of the greatest gifts Sigmar ever got, which is an arena where the Stormcast Eternals can fight each other, and any wounds that are done during the battle aren't real. It's an Olgu enchantment, essentially. So people can train fighting for real really hard and they won't kill each other, which is an amazing gift. But at the same time, Malerion also uses it as a spy piece. So he can watch all of Sigmar's armies, watch what he's doing, and is keenly aware of all of his strategies. Which is
He's
like
basically Malekith, as Malekith should be.
Yeah, it's like that's
Malekith isn't chaos. Malekith fought chaos forever. Malekith wasn't a bad guy per se. He just took extreme routes towards what was eventually his inevitable success. Yeah, it's a shame.
So it's weird. I am really, really, really hoping that this is just like, hey, this character's not really important for what we're doing right now. So just throw some shit at the wall, and when and if
it's propaganda.
When and if we get around to playable Dark Elves, then we'll fix it. I really hope that's the case. But we won't know till
me too.
Hammond, speak for yourself. Like Carl Friend says, no peace, just war. There's no truce with Twitch. Fair. Sounds like Malerion needs Shagaroth in his life. I definitely prefer a more balanced Malaria. My brain just goes to malaria when I hear the name Malerion.
Mine has a few times as well, which is not great.
Yeah, it's Yeah.
Move on.
Devil's Advocate, this might have been an attempt to write an unreliable / biased narrator. After all, Tomb King's player and Malerion would be seen as the origin of all the world's evils as well. That would have been cool if they had gone out of their way to stay that, but it's definitely from a narrative. It's from a narrator point of view. Granted, it's a very biased narrator, but it's not. They used to do, if you go back and read, like, especially the 6th edition rule books, they used to do some really cool shit with in-character or in-person, like, writings for factions, which was neat. And even this book does that, but they do it in quotes. Like, it'll have a quote attributed to an individual, as opposed to just, like, otherwise they use narrator voice, which is like...
Yeah, this is God voice, sadly.
Yeah, it's a weird God voice.
On high. It is, but yeah.
Derek, thank you very much.
Hey, Derek.
Any chance the characterization of Malekith has more to do with being succinct for a non-core faction than intent to change the character itself? That's what I'm hoping the case, but there's no...
Right, I'm going to directly tackle this one. No, this was a decided choice. This was definitely a choice. I could have written it in the same space and kept the complexity and also the inevitable outcome of what happens to Malerion in place. It would not have been difficult. This is an editorial decision to make the bad guys bad and the good guys good. And this isn't just something that we're sort of making up and surmising. They say this on their website. It's up on Games Workshop right now in one of the nice little interviews that they have with some of the writers. And they say, yeah, things have changed a little bit where we're really making, the evil people evil and the good people good, to which I just throw my hands up in almost despair. It's so not Warhammer. It completely misses the point, not only of the roots of Warhammer, which were often based on a mixture of satire, awesome, cool, whatever fiction they've been reading lately, and also the politics of the era from which they came from. It completely disses all 8th editions and everything else that came after that. It's a simplification that feels like it's aimed for kids or people who just don't want to really think.
Yeah,
it's not cool.
The best way I can put it is it to me feels like, once again, it smacks of the idea that there's somebody at Games Workshop who was in charge of editing or writing this, who looked at it and goes, no, this is a side game, this is a specialty game, this is not a core game. I don't want this to be complex. This needs to be simple. Which you could tell there are other parts of the books where it almost feels like someone else is in charge, because that person argues back. It's weird.
It is. You'll see it as we go.
Malerion gave Sigmar the danger room?
Yes. Yes.
Andy, can you explain real quick how the duchies and the right map from Patreon, do you just put random German words together?
I read Warhammer books and I find them and then I put them on the map.
There you go. Truly a mysterious process.
It is a mysterious process. Although, having said that, I did create some of them, but that's because I was creating them for books. So, this is a slightly different answer to that question.
All right, hopping real quick into the Rise of Men's section so we can keep trucking along here. So we've got Ancient Nehekara, which they talk about for a bit. This part is not anything super, like, I would have liked a little part in here about Nehek, It's overall pretty like it's just like, oh yeah, the humans like rise in the great land out of the desert. They make a sophisticated form of government. They make big cities. They do a lot of sailing through using the rivers and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, neat.
So basically, the Nehekara bits is everything that we already know, but scraping out Nehek. In that there was a great, mighty empire that was entirely human run and was human, and it was a long time ago. But you know, who made it? How did it occur? Who really cares? Because Cetra's coming later, and he is going to be the leader of the first human empire quite a few centuries later. It's a bit of a weird take, particularly when you look at the timeline and how they expressed it a few pages earlier.
They literally say, greatest of the cities was Kimri, the city of kings, and by tradition, whoever ruled there first among equals. All they had to do was include a line that's like, because that's where Nehek united all the cities. You're done.
Yeah.
They're like,
and it also it grounds the entirety of the place in a form of reality, because you can suddenly begin to understand what Nehekara means. You're like, oh, it's right, and Nehek, and he did this, and why Cetra taking on his mantle through where he took it on through Kemri also makes sense. It takes almost no space, and we're talking like a single word in paragraphs where we've got loads of space already. So this is basically just an odd choice to remove Nehek.
Yep. Tylos. Okay, this section, I do like this section. Though it's weird. Once again, Skaven are really not a playable faction, right?
Yeah.
They're not playable. They're barely mentioned. Like they mentioned the really important things the Skaven do in the timeline, but they leave them mostly untouched. But then Tylos is going to get 2 entire sections. So they go on to say, okay, yeah, Tylos, they tell you where it is, next to the Arana Mountains and the Talayan Sea. They talk about the people that set up in the city that will one day become Skaven Blight. They talk a lot about these people. The dwarves move in. This is actually more lore on Tylos than I think we've ever had.
So this lore has popped up again and again in White Dwarves, in Skaven books, in role-playing books, in one version or another. That's cool. And seeing it here in a core Warhammer book is also cool. What's not cool is the Skaven aren't even in this, nor are they planned to be for at least, I imagine, quite some time. So it's actually irrelevant when you've got things like, say, Estalia, who are older than this and marked as older than this elsewhere. Why don't Estalia get a bit of place? Yeah, they're not also getting any stress in the main parts of the system, apparently, although I imagine we're going to have an Estalian faction at some point, at least one little book explaining, here's some Estalians. They could have done with some space. Do we get any of that? Literally none. So instead, we focus upon something which, in the end, has nothing to do with the rise of men and is only one amongst many rises of men in this particular area. It is a deeply odd inclusion, given the stresses the book makes, but also a super welcome one, because it's something that I feel is definitely worth including.
Yeah, so it's weird. Like, I do love that they talk about that, like, the human setup, the dwarves showed up, the dwarves build, they make an alliance, they build a great city together, and they even mentioned the whole, like, kind of Tower of Babylon thing of, like, oh, we're going to make a giant bell tower. And the new thing that they added that I really like is they talk about that they wanted it to be the greatest structure in the world, but not only do they want it to be the tallest structure ever built in the old world, but it's supposed to go as far underground as it does above ground, which is a cool bonus.
That's a lovely little addition. And it also speaks to the dwarves that are a part of that process. And I think fits in really nicely. Love it.
Yeah, that like, I love that line because, like, in the older lore, it's really just that the tower was really, really tall. There was no mention of really the dwarves contributing. I like that the dwarves got their pride also contributed to this problem that ends up happening.
Isn't it? Well, wait a minute. Tylos, isn't it Kavzar?
Well, it's like
Tylos is the people.
That's true. Yeah, that actually is true. They call it the cursed city of Tylos, which is not correct. Well, like,
if you added a there, the cursed city of the Tylos, that would work.
Yeah, I have seen, I don't remember which book it is, but I know there is a book. It might be one of the second edition roleplay books that calls the city Tylos, but the Skaven books always call it Kavzar. So there's always been like a weird because I remember having chats about like whether the city is Tylos or maybe it was that the king was Tylos.
No, that's the people. It's the Tylos tribe in the same way you get the Umberrigan tribe, or you get the Teutogan tribe, or you get the Bretonnian tribe of the North Sea. It was the Tylos people that moved into that area. And it's where Tilian comes from. It's where the classical language comes from as well. And the Tylos people were directly associated with Myrmidia. Or at least Myrmidia, who, as she would eventually become, who's slightly different. The goddess may have had a different name back then. Yeah, there's definitely something a little bit slightly off there. I'm going to go double check that one, but it should be Kavzar and it should be the Tylos people if we're running by traditional lore.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's interesting that they went with Tylos as the option, considering if you read like the Skaven books, which I feel like would have been the first source they would have read for. That book doesn't even use the word Tylos. It literally just talks about Kazvar.
Doom of Kavzar. Yeah, totally.
So
I mean, it's the whole point. I mean, the bell tolling, the Doom of Kavzar. I'm a little bit bemused by that choice. I'm a little bit also bemused that I didn't mark it in my notes when I was making my way through the book.
I'm curious if they were ever going to delve into it more. I'm curious if they would end up being like the nation is going to be called Kazvar, or like who knows. Or maybe
who knows? There's clearly a slight rewrite here, and what they're rewriting is pretty much clear inside the established lore. Some of the squirrely bits off to the side that might make small mistakes, they've made a couple of contradictions, but the core lore is really clear here. That's that the city's called Kavzar and the people are the Tylos people. So yeah, there's definitely a little thing there.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's next?
Strife of the Great Land. I don't think there's a lot to discuss in this section.
I'm going to happily do something I don't normally do with these ones and say that this entire double-page spread, there's a couple of points that's worth going in here. For example, the ridiculous language used to describe Cetra at various points, which they slightly contradict as well. But the Strife in the Great Land, Cetra, the King of Kings, the Mortuary Cult, and the Rise of Nagash is pretty much the story as we know it, just carved down into smaller parts. I don't think there's anything especially exciting through here. That's new.
I would agree.
It's what we know already. I will make a couple of points about Cetra, though. Yet again, they have described Cetra in complicated. No, I'm going to simplify this much further. They have described him as pure evil, but he also managed to make everything work. But he's pure evil, by the way, and he's a maniacal, cackling bad guy. And they say it again and again and again throughout. And it ends up creating some of the pitches that they make with Nagash versus Cetra and everything feel a bit off. Also makes the final lines underneath the Cetra King of Kings parts where he restores Nehekara to greatness. After all of the earlier lines where he's vain, egotistical, evil, wrong, doesn't suffer anyone to live, and all of these things without explaining how all of these character traits can actually come out with a good result. Other than, he's a general. So basically, the only thing that they say positive is that he can kick ass and chew gum. So he's actually a tyrant, and that's it. And whilst, yes, he is a tyrant, he's a tyrant that brings complete peace to his land. And it's worth, again, saying that they don't like shades of grey at all. And that causes some slight issues when they then go, yes, he did all these incredibly evil things, which suggests that he's basically going to have everyone rise up in arms against him. But no, that doesn't happen. In fact, if anything, the opposite happens.
He's evil as fuck, and his people loved him.
And his people, yeah. What? There's definitely something that needs to be addressed for the writing here, because they've got an outcome they're aiming at, and they slightly miss it, I think.
Yeah, and this is definitely a victim, or Cetra, along with like Malerion and a bunch of other characters, especially the bad guy characters, are super big victims of this, where the arcane tomes, which would need to do a lot of the legwork of explaining the characters and nuance, are like they don't have any lore. Like they're super duper teeny tiny compared to like the 8th edition army books, which were still smaller than like the 6th edition books when it came to lore, but they were like packed with lore.
Totally were,
which is very strange. But I think we've waxed lyrical about that enough.
Yeah, I think so too. Shall we jump on some stupid chats before we head on to the Doom of Tylos, not the Doom of Kravstar?
Yep, we can knock those out
soon. Doom of Tylos, really?
Yeah, it's a weird. It's like
Yeah. Anyway, bring up their comments.
Yeah.
I'm checking through to see if there's any from Twitch as well. Where you going?
Oh, I was excited to hear the announcement of the third host of Lorebeards, Gelt. Congratulations.
What? Nobody told me this. What?
I mean, to be fair, he'd have interesting things to say. I wouldn't be against it.
Screw that guy. That'd be conflict on stream.
So CB4N says, I believe the city is called Tylos. The dwarf hold beneath it is Kazvar, and the people are the Krimlo. I don't think that's correct. Let's see. Michael Santa Maria, thank you. When weird in Age of Sigmar, when it's brought up, they call it the Tower of Kazvar in Skavenblight is how they mention it in Age of Sigmar.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not sure what they're doing with all the name changing. Because if anything, it felt like Tylos was like something that was used a little bit earlier in writings, and then they kind of pivoted onto Kazvar and they stuck with Kazvar, and now they've switched back to trying to use Tylos, but they're trying to use it for like the same thing instead of clearly.
I mean, what, 20 years ago I was writing about Tylos and the people and Myrmidia and everything, so it's not exactly. I mean, this is established stuff, and more importantly, established by the studio inside the army lists. And generally speaking, the army lists are giving precedent over everything else, the most recent addition to the game. I mean, that's very general, obviously, but it's an odd choice, I think. But that's, again, by the by.
Jonathan, yes, man, thanks. Forget Skaven. There's no such thing as Skaven. Yep. Sleep well. There's nothing beneath us. Nothing beneath the feet. Everything's good. Everything's safe. Total War Neighbor, thank you very much. Appreciate the sweet words. Appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right. So, jumping back to Tylos with the Doom of Tylos.
Yeah.
So this section is pretty much
again,
like other than the all the Tylos wording, it's basically the same story. It's literally just the Doom of Kazvar. Tale.
Indeed, for these little sections that we're moving through just now, I think it's worth saying that this is exactly the sort of material we were discussing at the very beginning of the stream. And by that, I mean, this is the stuff that does largely what we expect. And because this is a stream about changes, we don't sit there and go, oh, they did this right, they did that right. Isn't this great? We did that. We just read it and we go, oh, that's pretty damn good. Let's move on.
Oh, good.
But that's not the point of this stream. So this stream does make us look super negative. That's not what we feel about the book in general, because these sections, they do their job. They do exactly what we expect. There is an interesting focus.
I am so excited to read this afternoon. Like, y'all don't even know. Despite the bitching, super excited.
Yeah, totally. It's an interesting focus on pretty much undead all the way through, but it's sort of to be expected. There's no real mentions of, say, for example, Cathay or whatever in this nonsense. But this is the rise of men, and Cathay sort of is the rise of men. Nippon, there could have been lots of little extras dropped in here, even if they were little drop.
Yeah, the rise boxes. Of men section is odd. It feels like it would have been better to be like, okay, we're gonna dedicate like one page, maybe two, to each major human empire.
Or the rise of the old world. I mean, because take a look at it. This is basically the civilizations of the old world getting together. It's ignoring the rest of the world and the various civilizations that are building, getting established, whether it's 1,000 gods or whether it's a bunch of dragons or whether it's something else that's leading them. They're pretty much ignored.
It's like they don't bring up Estalia or Talea.
No,
they only bring up Talea to talk about the Skaven, which is weird because like that's not important. Why are the Skaven featured in the Rise of Men section when A, they're Skaven, and B, it's not relevant to the setting that they're selling? Like, this would be a cool section to include in a Skaven book if they make that at some point, but I don't understand why it's in the core book. It's very weird decision making.
Yeah, they could have just dropped that in Skaven's. Yeah,
I will say
it happened.
Yeah, but there are some other weird things where like the Vengeance of Nagash second, like they wax very lyrical on Nagash, but for the vampires, they don't name any vampires. Like they don't bring up
a single one of them.
Yeah, they don't bring up Neferata or Vlad or any of them until actually later.
Later.
They will talk about names in the Vampire Wars, but like I think a mention of Neferata would have been fine here, especially because she's pretty important to the setting as a character.
this is I'm going to call out something just in general here. They seem to be focusing in the writing on things that either they like or that they decide to, I don't know, bring to the fore that are utterly irrelevant. For example, in the Mercantile and Strygos section, okay, all the way over on page 38, it's all about Kadon and what Kadon did. Who cares? That's specific details.
It's like, oh, Kaden and Ushoran. Why? Yeah. why bring them up, but not bring Neferata up?
Yeah, quite. Kaden in particular, who is one of the least important characters. I mean, he's important in the specific points they're dealing with, but he's not important to overall Warhammer at all. He's just another one of many characters that are progressed through. There's large chunks here. There's 6 sections actually: Dumatilos, Fall of Nagash, Cripple Peak, The Vengeance of Nagash, The Land of the Dead, and Mercantile and Strygos. All of that could be whittled down to 2 paragraphs.
Yeah,
easily.
Is it cool?
Easily,
lore? Sure.
Yeah, it's great lore.
Does it make sense for this book? No.
No.
No,
this should have been 2 paragraphs, and other paragraphs should have been given over to the rise of other civilizations around the world and how some of them might impact the old world, because they're either in it or they're sitting on the outside looking in. Job done, lots of groundwork done, and when they want to actually speak about the deeper details of the vampires and how they came to be, or Kadon and what happened to them,
then release
that can all drop that into some alternative book.
Super weird
lines
section
in there. It's just a weird section for how much stress it puts on things that are utterly irrelevant to the game that they're selling.
Yeah,
honestly, but I loved it. I mean, I like reading it. Yay!
Yeah,
but
it just the rise of men section felt very unnecessary for what this book is supposed to be teaching you about.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, the stuff it writes about, fine, cool, whatever. But it's just like, I don't know, none of this stuff's relevant to what you're supposed to be reading about. It's like taking a class and they're like, all right, the exam is going to be on physics, but by the way, a portion of your textbook is about ancient, like, it's about like Japanese film history. Cool, but why? Like, okay. All right. Coming of Sigmar. Okay, so now we're in the faction section. We are past the general history and we are now in factions.
I mean, are we?
Yes, because this is the Empire section. You don't get anything more than that. Like, because
I suppose
they they don't do a good job of saying we're in the Empire section, but you get the Witch Hunter art and the Coming of Sigmar, and then they do Empire, and then they never talk about the Empire again.
Then they go into the Southern Kingdoms. And they don't really talk factions. I don't really think we're properly in a faction section.
No, we are, because we do Sigmar now, then we do Bretonnia, then we do Southern Kingdom.
Some other bits, then we do the Elves after that.
But like we don't come back to humans. This is it.
No, this is it. Yeah, you're right.
Once again,
this is
weirdly paced.
Very weirdly paced and very weirdly. It feels like this book needs an editor.
Yeah, it does. Because this book, if you were to read this and not know who the playable factions are, this book implies the Southern Kingdoms are a playable faction.
100%.
And
I imagine they're going to be playable at some point, in some fashion or another. But nevertheless, it is oddly put together. Anyway, Coming of Sigmar, it starts off exactly where you'd expect, with no mention of the Twin-tailed comet in the slightest.
Yeah.
That just runs on our bitching from our previous stream, where we kind of tore into the whole how was the comet handled, and the question is quite clearly here in the Coming of Sigmar, not handled. They avoid it entirely. They just go straight into when he's an older person and becomes effectively the Heldenhammer after saving High King Kurgan's life and being given Gal Maraz. I found this entire section, in fact, everything for the Empire section, every single step, I have issues, but none of them are particularly large.
Yeah.
That's like, oh, really? You went there? You went there? Most of my issues are for the choices of information that they chose to put in place. This is a lot. They've got themselves 1, 2, I think it's 3 double-page spreads for the Empire.
Yeah, this is the most. No, it's more than that.
Yeah, we're given 3 double. Is it 1, 2?
Double page. Yes.
Yeah, double page spreads. So it's 3 double page spreads. Interestingly, no color opening in the same way that Bretonnia gets. I'm not sure why Bretonnia gets a color opening, but it does. Again, some really odd choices in terms of setting things up. The High Elves get a color opening, but other parts don't. The Wood Elves do, but the Empire does not. It just gets
By color opening, do you mean like the color piece of art? Because they do get.
Oh,
the
it's
witch
on the
hunter.
previous page. Oh, it's on the previous page.
Yeah,
oh, that's rubbish.
But it's weird. It's a witch hunter, not like.
Oh, that's bad.
Like most of the factions, they use like their 6th, 7th, or 8th edition army book art. But for the Empire, it's literally just the random witch hunter art from inside the 8th edition book.
Yeah.
Which is like, why wouldn't they use one of the cover arts?
Oh, I'm particularly bemused because all the rest of them, basically your spreads for the factions start off with a splat page and then you move into it. But they've got the page before. It's just badly laid out. Okay, so they do have one. It's just badly laid out, and they're given 7 pages, not 3 double-page spreads.
Seems to be a theme with this book. I like a lot of the stuff. I like a lot of the stuff in it, but like, I am not an editor. I don't know shit about editing. This book is badly edited.
Yeah, and
Andy is an editor.
Yeah,
but like,
sadly,
even from a mundane point of view, when you read this book, you go, "This is weird." Like, it's
not. It is.
I don't hate the book by any means. Overall, I'll still say it. 85 to 90% of this book I love, but it's weird. So I'm going to criticize it, but I like it. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like if I lost my copy, I'd buy it again.
So, if we go from the Heldenhammer, that just basically establishes right at the beginning that we've got Sigmar who gets the hammer. Then we get the birth of the Empire as Sigmar bans all of the tribes of the right base together. Blackfire Pass happens, and he kicks in the Greenskins, ending what was centuries of warfare. In fact, longer. I would actually say that the great victory of Blackfire Pass is bizarrely played down here. It is not giving the stress that it's often given in other books. Yeah, it was played up. An extraordinary battle.
Yeah, it's played up in the Greenskin section, but not in the Empire section, which is reversed. Like, it should be played up in the Empire section and played down in the Greenskin section.
But again, that speaks to how they're using their bad guys. The bad guys are there to get kicked in and be evil. So they stress on them getting kicked in and being evil, where the good guys are there to be heroic and build things. It's really weird. Sigmar's heirs, which is basically how Sigmar then rules and then passes his rule over. It's got one interesting little snippet here too, I would argue. I've written this story, what happens with Sigmar in books about 9 or 10 times, so I know it pretty well. But the couple of interesting snippets that they use here, number one is that they confirm the story of the hammer being passed down, so Sigmar doesn't leave with the hammer. That's a story that has changed multiple times in the past, and most recently has a different view. So it's really interesting they've gone back to this view as clear story. The second point is that they define him going east to the World's Edge Mountains, where often he's defined as starting going east and actually heading south. If you want to go for a single direction, you might go for south, not east, because he tends to head down towards Blackfire Pass through a circuitous route. So that's also interesting, but the details here are super cool. There's literally nothing that I go, oh, that's wrong. It's much more along the lines of, that's an interesting simplification. The Electra Count's not explaining where they get their names from. I mean, that's totally cool. You don't need to know about the root of the word count, and it comes from comes, and that means companion, because these were Sigmar's companions, and they were the ones that voted in for his replacement. They've simplified it down, and it all works nicely. The Empire at War section, I actually found a bit.
They pack a lot of very vague information into a teeny tiny box. Yeah, like they take 2,300 years worth of text and go, 3 paragraphs. There you go.
Yeah, although no, not quite. This is really about 1,000 years worth of time, and it's quite common in the books that deal with this part of the history, because they're dealing with up to about the point of when the empire begins to fracture, and we get the time of 2 emperors, time of 3 emperors, and all spreads. This section here really is focusing more on what lies without, and it doesn't really speak to the empire and what it was doing at the time, which was expanding fast. So you don't get that at all really from this. You just get the empire is the empire. Already, it's already in place. Everything is cool, and they're being beset by enemies, which they kick in because they're good guys. And the Empire rocks, man. The Empire rocks. It's fine. I'll also note one other point, which I think is in the first one in Heldenhammer, or is it in Birth? No, it's in Birth of the Empire, I think, where they use the word. No, here it is. It's at the bottom of Sigmar's heirs. There we go. A great church. Now, I call this one out because that's a banned word in most of the books I've worked on. They don't use the word church. They use the word cult. specifically because they try to
that's weird.
they try to distance the polytheistic world of Warhammer from the real world, where churches, or very much the church, can be an issue. Now, this was not the case in Black Library books, where they would often use the word church all over the place because the editors there either didn't care or they weren't bothered by it. But every single commandment that I had coming down from Games Workshop very clearly said, you never use the word church anymore. Sure, some Black Library books did that, but we don't pay attention to them. Never use the word church. And to a degree, this made me feel like this was a book that lay outside the studio's remit, in that the classic studio's line of this is what we do has not quite been communicated through. And we've got the word church slipping back in again, which I find super fun.
Yeah, there is something interesting to bring up with the way this book was created, which may explain a lot of the weirdness, which is that for those unaware, this game, as much as it seems like it was not created purely by just the GW head studio, it was a collaboration between the GW studio and the Forge World studio, which that may explain a lot of the weird shit, is that there might be two completely different studios working, because I've heard a lot of really interesting rumors about the creation of the old world and some of the tensions between the studios, and there were apparently tensions. So, like, it could be that a lot of the weird stuff is because there was not a single, like, this is the approach we're going to take, but two approaches that got mashed into one book when whoever won the power struggle won the power struggle.
Or one approach that didn't know certain things that sat on the other side. There's all different ways we could view this. But I do find the word church is almost more telling than some of the other changes that have been made, because this is one, I had it drilled into me 1,000 times. And the reasons why were drilled into me. I even got an email directly from the studio at one point, explaining it very cleanly.
Yeah, so you'll find this interesting here.
Is it the one
someone
from
pointed out that in translated books they don't use the word church.
Interesting. I do find that fun. And I do find it really interesting, particularly given that so many of the people that were involved with parts of it I know through friends, and they're some of the same people and they know some of the same stuff. So I'm very interested to see the language choice that is being made. That word, however, just the great church that spread, is deeply telling as to the nature of the editorial line and how much it toes the line that had come from before.
Yep. Let's see. Empire Divided. So this section basically sets up kind of the modern era.
Oh, we're over on the other side. Empire Divided, yes.
Yeah. So you get that 1,000 years, the Empire is doing great, cool, and then they get kind of specific with Boris Goldgather, and then that when he dies, the elector counts start kind of fractioning a bit. And we get some mentions about the Skaven. They hilariously call them mutant ratmen in the section, despite the fact they call them. I don't think they barely use the word Skaven in this book. I think they only use the timeline section.
In the timeline, yeah.
But they talk about the whole Black Plague incident, and the Skaven come up, and the Skaven almost win, and then Mandrid unites everyone. Some other shenanigans happen. The Skaven lose, and then he gets assassinated, and all hell breaks loose with Attila being when she declares herself empress.
Yeah, so Estalia, the whole Attilian emperors. In fact, I'm just going to skip through this section because the Age of Emperors, the anarchy that follows as we get ourselves
verbatim old stuff,
and the vampire wars that follow is almost verbatim, bar one thing. Most of this is well known. This entire section could be summed up on a single double-page spread. I think it is massively overwritten. There is much more here than is actually required to set everything up. And I love my lore. I'm very much the sort of person to be looking for more at every single corner. But the Heldenhammer, Birth of Empire, and Sigmar's Heir section could have almost been 2 paragraphs. Empire at War, War Divided, Age of Three Empires, the Anarchy, and the Vampire Wars could almost have been 2 paragraphs. And then moving on to the Empire today, where it sits, could have been a nice double-page spread or even just a single page. There is a lot of overwriting here because they've got a lot of facts that they want to get across, apparently, but they've ignored the facts in other factions in ways that upsets me deeply, yet they're willing to spend time here on often parts that don't need time. I find most interesting, though, where they've arrived at with the Empire today. And I find
Before
this
you do that,
interesting. Oh, yes, go.
I do have one other note that I found interesting, which is that every time they bring up Manfred von Karstein's defeat in the Vampire Wars, they never use the word kill. They never use the word died. They always just say he was defeated, which leaves an open door, because in 8th edition, there was a huge retcon in 8th edition Vampire Counts where they come out and say Manfred did not die at Helfin. He was merely defeated. He pretends to die, and then he runs around gathering knowledge and power for a few centuries before he kind of really reappears later. Whereas in the older lore, he does full on die at Helfin, and he gets accidentally resurrected by Gotrek and Felix.
So I'm going to start off with the point I was making. Page 44, the Empire Today sums up what came up before on the previous 4 pages. Why are you doing summaries? What the fuck are you doing? That is a terrible section, because it basically says that those previous parts we didn't need. It's not doing anything great. This bit here sums it up, wastes an entire paragraph to basically tell us stuff that we already know. We then go on to Faith and Gunpowder, which is effectively the paragraph where they're explaining what the Empire is today again. And it takes a super interesting line right at the beginning where it says it's the arguably most technologically advanced nation in the world. And that is bullshit. Actual bullshit. I can list several that are more. I can list some in the old world that are arguably more. Tilia is repeatedly described as being technologically as advanced and sometimes more further advanced. The colleges of Nuln, where they, not the colleges of Nuln, where what's the school called? The gunnery school. There's gunnery school in Nuln. That was founded by a Tilian, for goodness sake, because they were significantly further ahead than the Empire was on various technological fronts. And that technology that he left effectively becomes the pinnacle of their capabilities. Well, Tilia has already moved past it. I would argue that this section is a good bit of Empire propaganda where they're attempting to show, oh, I hate this, the well-drilled state troops. The concept of the state troop got put in place by Magnus the Pious. So the state armies, as you understand them, is Magnus the Pious.
There's a ton of pre-Magnus things that show up.
Yeah.
That should be there. Like the War Altar. The War Altar is a playable mini, despite the fact this is before Magnus the Pious.
There's some really interesting choices here, but the bit that I actually want to drill on, because it's the bit that I'm actually quite excited by, stroke incredibly bemused by, is the pretender section. Now, the first part of that is the concept of a pretender means that somebody is right. Somebody is the real one, and the others are pretenders. There is no one who's right here. These aren't pretenders. These are individual groups who all claim that they should be in control. So first things first, the title isn't exactly on point. And the breakup of who they've got, I find really fascinating, because it overwrites lore that I've written, that's been written by other people, and has been pretty much founded all the way back to the 80s, and is really relatively well known. And they've just gone, nope, this is how we're organizing the new factions. But at the same time, they actually call out all the old lore each and every step, including some bits I wrote. So I find it super fascinating to see both the rewrite they put in place and the old lore that they've tried to say, oh, but we're actually recognizing this and saying it's also this. So, for example, we've got the Barony of Westerland. The Barony of Westerland is what will become the Wasteland. Marienburg, the place that secedes from the Empire. And at this point, as was previously established, it's part of the electoral group and go to war with it. So they are effectively with the princedom, the Principality of Reichland, which is super fascinating that they've separated them and they've marked those. So that means we've already got the electoral group of emperors. That includes Nuln, that includes Reichland, that includes Westland. They're at each other's throats all the time, but they're effectively one group that are fragmented. They've chosen to fragment it into just 2, and that is Westerland and Reichland for the electoral emperors. We then go down to Osterland, which is just a farce of names. House of Ulrich. What's the House of Ulrich? Where's that come from? That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me in this section. They bring up the Wolf Emperors, but don't keep the Wolf Emperor name.
Yeah, it's Osterland. Where did that come from? Why on earth are the Wolf Emperors of Middenheim taking any name other than Middenland, Middenheim, or some equivalent. They just wouldn't. The nationalistic pride of the Teutogens is enormous. And to see them happily becoming Osterland, as if that's some sort of happy compromise, they're a warlike conquering folk. They conquer others. It would be the Middenheim Empire, so to speak, or the Wolf Emperors, and they have not gone for that at all. They've basically created a new area that Middenheim is a subservient part of, which is, to me, utterly crazy.
It's extra weird because they talk about that the current ruler of the so-called Grand County of Osterland is a wolf emperor. Like,
yeah, I know.
The way they word it, he's still a wolf emperor, but he's like, oh, but I also rule over Osterland, but I'm not going to call myself the wolf emperor of a name that I would actually want to rule over. Instead, I'm going to call it Osterland, even though I can't extend any control over it, because they even go out of their way to say he's like one of the weakest factions right now.
Yeah, which sounds mental to me, particularly fascinating that they include Hochland in this. And why do I find that fascinating? Because Hochland had been territorially with Talabheim land always. They conquered it again and again. Now, calling out saying I recently captured Hochland would have made it a really cool detail because it was often conquered by one side or the other, and one was one of the original grand provinces that was put in place by good old Sigmar a long time ago. So the Sigmarites are constantly trying to ensure that it maintains its integrity as it's destroyed by the Ottilians on one side and the Wolf Emperors on the other again and again and again. But yeah, none of that's there. I find that fascinating. The Principality of Reichland I find fascinating because it's Sigmar land, and that's it.
Chaos is the weakest grip on the old world here. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, in the established lore, the Reichland had split into at least 3 major factions, with the Principality of Altdorf to the north, with the Electoral Emperor still held court. We had the Kingdom of Vorbergland that sat beneath that. So half of Reichland is not controlled by the Principality of Reichland, as it's understood. The Kingdom of Vorbergland sits underneath that, and other states had also separated entirely from the Reichland. Again, they've massively simplified it, which I understand for the battle game, because you're looking for nice, simple tales that you can tell. But they simplified it, got rid of the old family that used to rule there, which I believe was, I think at this point, is Sigismund of House Holzkrug, who was the emperor, the electoral emperor of the time. And they've instead gone for Prince Wilhelm, which again calls forth House Holzwig-Schlieffen. That's Karl Franz's family originally. And that's also super fascinating. It is almost, it's beyond a simplification. It's basically, this is Sigmar land. And it's all united, and it's against chaos. So a massive rewrite of what came before and a removal of all the complexity. But the Grand Duchy of Talabheim, by comparison, retains a lot of it. It's the largest, by significantly the largest, and always was historically. It was also the strongest by a significant measure. Talabheim right at the very center of it. Hochland often ruled, Ostland often ruled, Ostermark often ruled. Down to the south, we had Stirland, often ruled by Talabheim. They had an enormous amount of territory, which they gained and lost over time. But the Ottoman Empire banned Sigmarism when Estalia first takes the throne. And it's been banned, the worship of Sigmarite, right up to right now, and will not be reinstated until Magnus comes along. No mention of that at all, although they do mention that the cult of Tal does support them. It wasn't just the cult of Tal, it was also the cult of Ulrich at one point as well. They helped establish the cult of Ulrich, that's the god of winter, wars, and wolves to the north. They helped establish everything that was the Attilian Empire. And then when they fell out because of the cult of Tal, they went north and helped found the Wolf Emperors, causing the time of the 3 emperors in many ways. So it's still all there.
Well, another thing that's kind of interesting in this section is that they do seem to kind of go out of their way to, like, when they release this inevitable Empire faction book, it really seems like not only do you have your 4 like sections as far as like the sub factions, but each of them is supported by a different cult as well, which I think they're going to be calling out for model reasons of, like, Westerland has Manon's support, Osterland has Ulrich, Reichland has Sigmar, and then Talabheim has Tal. They lean pretty heavily into that.
And I like that. I think that's going to be super flavorful for the game. I don't dislike any of the changes they've made. I bring them all up because they're fascinating and interesting. Westerland has been given more prominence. Osterland has been made up wholesale out of whole cloth. It didn't exist before. It is an entirely new thing they have built. Before this, it would have been the electoral emperors. They would have just been of the empire. As far as they were concerned, the wolf emperors ruled the empire, and the rest of them were wrong. The Attilian emperors, they're largely exactly as they were. The Principality of Reichland has been, if anything, demoted. It's been made just a single principality. It's much weaker, while simultaneously bizarrely stronger, somehow the strongest of them all. And all of the fragmentation that Reichland was going through at this point is just bluntly ignored. So if you're looking for somewhere where there is an enormous amount of lore change, this page is it. It pretty much just takes everything that came before, and it goes, how will we use this as an inspiration for our version of what the Empire is going to become? And I'm not against that, because the details that you can find for this are spread across various books, both roleplay books and novels and similar. So they're going to be hard to find for those who are doing the research. But nevertheless, the choices for Osterland in particular make me go, scritch, scritch, scritch.
Yeah,
really?
The Empire of all the factions, the Empire is the one where I'm the most interested to get narrower focus books, whether that's like even the arcane journals. Like I just want to see what's going on now for a lot of these factions, because there's a lot of change. Which, granted, like the second they announced the old world, like I think me and Andy were both like, all right, the Empire of Sigmar is going to change significantly.
Oh yeah.
Like ain't no way they're not going to change like crazy. Most of the other factions have remained relatively stable as far as like compared to their old stuff, but this one's like bump, bump, like big speed bump. Not necessarily bad, just very different. But yeah, a lot of there's the only like my biggest critical changes is that they kind of leaned a little too heavy into, oh, we want to let you use your old models, to the extent that a lot of things got moved being invented earlier in time, but that's not a huge deal.
Blasters doing their thing, but then they had always been dropped at around about 2010 in terms of when they were first. Then I was once down to do a Black Library book on, it's a long time ago now, on all of the different war machines of the Empire, and it fell through because of the timing of it, and Black Library changed how it was doing its background books. It stopped doing them. The studio started doing them. And one of the big issues with the history of black powder weapons is that the more you look into the books, the further back you realize they go. And you realize that the cannons that are recent inventions were being used at about 500 IC, that the dwarves were using cannons all the way back in Sigmar's time. And it just keeps on stretching. And then other books come out and say, yeah, no, they weren't. And it's a big, massive mess of different dates.
Yeah, big disagreement there. Well, like, just like a good example is like, I think in the 8th edition Army book under the Hellblaster volley gun section, it says it's such a recent invention that in its test firing, the reason it's called a Hellblaster volley gun is because they fired it next to Kurt Hellborg, and the storm of vitriol he unleashed on them for like the misfiring of the gun or something gave it
that
its
can't
name.
be true, because they exist now.
Yeah,
they're
so
right there. They're right there
like,
in page 44.
Yeah, like it specifically mentions that. But like, I'm really curious. And granted, I have to go look at I haven't looked at the Forces of Fantasy book in enough detail yet, which we will eventually do a stream on. Definitely not going to do this stream, but eventually.
Oh no, we're not going to get there this stream.
Yeah, but like, I'm really curious how they're going to try and explain where the War Altars come from, considering they're playable minis, despite the fact that the War Altar, which was a singular piece, was made for Magnus after the Great War.
Yeah, I quite like seeing the bring back of it, because they were back in the original 3rd edition of Warhammer for the Empire, and there was just War Altars as a particular choice that you could take. Indeed, most of the human empires had some sort of equivalent, so I'm not against that. But the War Altar itself, the War Altar. Yeah, you're going to be rewriting things for that one. So I'm going to conclude on my part there, because I can conclude simply, which is, I like the fact that we've got ourselves a nice split for the Empire for a simplified version for the old world game. I think that's good. I think splitting it up by the 4 gods is also good, because
I am very excited to see the sub factions and like how they play different.
I think it's marvelous, in fact, because we've got ourselves 4 gods being the center rather than 1 or maybe 2 if you include Ulrich, if we look at the Storm of Chaos. The Empire was often just depicted as 1 god only, Sigmar. And here we've got ourselves Sigmar, Manan, Tal, and Ulrich. Sadly, it's all the male gods because it's always all the male gods because that's just what Games Workshop does. They are not necessarily war gods. Manan is not a war god. Tal is not a war god. So you can't even use that justification. Myrmidia is a war goddess. If you want to have another war god, it's Myrmidia. It's Myrmidia, Ulrich, and Sigmar. But regardless, we've got ourselves 4 factions, each of which have got their own flavor. This is good. They have completely rewritten all 4 factions to make them work within that paradigm, and they have removed anything close to, well, let's say complexity to the lands to make that work. It's similarly, Games Workshop have done this before more than once. They did the same when the 4th edition of the Empire Army list, where they took the existing empire and they simplified it massively down to what we got into the empire that we know from 4th edition all the way to 8th. Before that, it was much more complicated. And here, they're adding, I would argue, less complication again, in that they're only going to focus on 4 parts of the world and the rest can go screw themselves.
Yep. So, Tech, thank you for the bits. The dwarves.
Thank you.
This is a great question, actually, about how the dwarves handled the time of 3 emperors. I actually think that's very ill explored, which
terribly,
which I think the old world is going to explore. About, like, I would not be surprised if, like, for the sub factions, it ends up being that, like, the Attilan faction, or the Talabek, Duchy of Talabek faction has a significant advantage in gunpowder stuff because A, they have Nuln, and B, they control all the land that pretty much connects to the Dwarf Empire.
They never had Nuln in the past. That's an entirely new step.
Yeah,
entirely new. That was expressly not the case. Nuln always stood with Altdorf in the past.
Yeah, so it'll be very interesting to see. Based on how they've kind of split up a lot of the factions, I'm kind of expecting Talabek to be I'm expecting Talabek to be very range heavy, with like black powder and a bunch of other stuff. But we'll see what happens. But hopefully we'll get like information on that kind of stuff. What Sigmarxism? Yeah, I've heard that joke.
I just suddenly realized what you're saying. Oh,
yeah.
I'm an idiot.
that took me a second. I've been to that subreddit a few times. But yeah, obviously Reichland. They're all snuffed up on that there. And Ricky Scotty, thank you very much. You know, okay, when you said Slon Mummy, for some reason my brain read that as like mommy instead, and I was like, I don't understand, and I don't like where this is going. Relic Priest, though, yeah, I'm full on board for Relic Priest. New Lord, Mandarin, Mutant Rat-Headed Beastman Slayer. Yeah. It's always funny that they changed it to Rat Slayer, but like the people in the Empire never seem to really think about that. Like that was apparently a big enough deal for him to get elected emperor. And they're like, oh, well.
I quite like the idea behind it is, if you look at it from the purely academic standpoint, that you've got yourself someone who ridded them of the Black Plague, and the Black Plague was later on, and through his reign, directly correlated through to vermin, and he removed the vermin and saved the empire. I think you could make a good good argument for the name.
Jonathan Scott, was there no other kid that was born the same year under the same comet as Sigmar? If not, then how do they know it's his comet and not another kid's? Well, okay, you say that, you joke, but there is a thing that the comet doesn't just herald Sigmar. It heralds many different things.
Yep, indeed.
Now, sometimes the writers like to forget that, but like a great example is that the comet heralded both Sigmar and Sotek.
Yeah,
but there's no reason to suggest that it doesn't herald multiple people, like humans as well. Granted, we only really get to see Sigmar's the only one that became super famous that we're aware of, but that doesn't mean he's the only one by any means.
Yeah.
Very quick question on dwarves. Do dwarves not having monsters post 3rd edition to the introduction of the Shard Dragon was deliberate, or did Games Workshop have no idea what monster dwarf should have gotten? So there was a very deliberate theming by Games Workshop where they wanted the dwarves to be a faction that pretty much relied purely on infantry and war machines.
Yeah.
The end. As the lore kind of started to get, when 8th edition monsters were hot, so to speak, they were in, they were the thing. And so they really started expanding very heavily on the concept of monsters. So Forge World kind of came out of like left field with a steel chair, suggesting that maybe there were subterranean monstrosities that ancient dwarves back during the Golden Age had learned to basically bind with runic collars. I fucking love that idea, especially because it literally has rules about that the dwarves don't give a shit about it. Like they don't care if it dies. They don't suffer panic checks or anything. They literally just see it as it's a weapon that it's a horrible monstrosity that if we don't bind it, it'll attack our holds, but it's going to attack the other like greenskins and Skaven if we do bind it, which I always thought was very, very cool and very dwarfy. In that they don't care for it. And nobody's riding it. It's just it's a force they have managed to aim at somebody else. But that being said, I would say it was very, very deliberate. However, if you consider runic guardians to be monsters, which some people do, some people don't, depending on their depictions and size, no, they've had kind of consistent monsters for like ever.
Yeah, I've runic guardians. Do they even really exist? I mean, I've written them into the book and out more than once. I mean, I've written about them in one of the things I wrote.
They show up in the artwork. They show up.
Yeah, I know.
Little mentions. So, they showed up
until they show up in models. They don't exist, as far as I'm concerned. Even though I've bloody written about them myself. So, do I like the introduction of shard dragons? Not really. Because it undermines the nature of the dwarves. Do I think you can write good stories around it? Yes. Can you make unique situations for it? Definitely. But do I like them as an overall concept for the army? Not really. I much prefer maintaining the focus of the armies. Now, if we're going to be looking at building ourselves some sort of runic guardian or equivalent, I definitely think there's something in that. But I'd be looking for tying that to times when the winds of magic are waxing high, the only times that the runes themselves that are so powerful need so much winds of magic to activate them will come to life, which means that we can use them in the upcoming storm when good old Magnus will be driving north towards Kislev. So adding them in then as an alternative faction piece of awesome, I think would be a really good idea. A bunch of runic peeps who've gone down under the ground, awakened old runes. That, I think, makes better monsters than just simply doing the same thing that every other army does. Trying to keep the tone and theme of each of the armies discreet and clean is pretty important, I think. And just giving them yet another monster is somewhat undermining for the overall theme of that army, which doesn't really do that. So that's more my personal opinion rather than
I will say
it'll land.
What would be completely sacrilegious is the dwarves ever rode on a monster or used the monster for like an important thing. Because dwarves are very not trusting of anything that's not a dwarf and doesn't have its feet firmly planted on the ground.
Gyrocopters and yeah. I'd be looking for tech and runes. I wouldn't be looking for monsters, which they tend to kill.
Yeah, honestly, looking back, it was weird that Forge World created a shard dragon instead of just doing like a big rune golem.
Yeah, it was an odd choice.
It was an odd choice.
It was an odd choice.
Cool model though, or cool artwork. Tyler Woodworth, happy birthday! Super disappointed to hear Malekith was favorite Dark Elf. He's still great. He's still awesome, just not in this book. Just
agreed.
In other books. I get it. The narrator is the advisor very early in his Imperial base is struggling to assimilate continuous demon tier lore blocks. Yeah, obviously, yes, of course. It was Dodgy Johan all along. It explains so much.
All along.
I wonder if they'll eventually add Cetra's Total War rival Surtha Ek, the Varg Everchariot. I will bet you so much money Games Workshop has no fucking idea who Surtha Ek even is. I bet you there is not a single employee at Games Workshop who knows who Surtha Ek is. That is a Total War contained phenomena, unfortunately. It really feels like all the good editors were busy with the Siege of Terra series, and the writers for this also completely forgot that heroes can only be as awesome as the villains are competent and complex.
Yeah, and the villains can only be awesome if they're against competent and complex heroes. They all need to be competent, complex, and interesting, fascinating people, not just perfect examples of what they do. I am perfectly evil. I am perfectly brilliant. I am perfectly, utterly dull.
Yeah, boring as fuck. Michael, we will get to the Chaos Tribes.
We will.
Do come up. They have their own section, which is actually a really interesting section.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty good.
Commander Bone, thank you. Appreciate it, my dude. Let's see. I bet that they're going to rewrite the lore in the future Skaven book that they were once the nobility of Tylos. That's what they were. Luckily, they did not change the story that much. They kept the Doom of Kazvar story pretty much.
It's pretty much exactly the same. It's just the use of Tylos is interesting in this particular instance.
Yep. What god likes baking cookies? Manon.
Seriously.
The battle examples include current lore, such as Reichland Patrol meeting Gatalabek 1 and the Witch Hunters sparking the fight on page 294. Nuln equals free.
Good. Thanks for spotting that one. I couldn't exactly recall. I didn't think that Nuln were tied to it, but Sotek the word said they were, so I just went, sure they are. I couldn't recall.
on the that's your Telebic note.
Yeah, it does right there. Although
says that's why they're so strong. They got those two big old cities.
Yeah, ostensibly includes them all. So it doesn't. That's crazy. They're trying to say that all of the South, see, much of the South, Averland in particular, they fell strongly with the electoral, and have historically always followed the electoral route through the Principality of Reichland at its heart, largely because, well, it's often Nuln. Nuln was the center of the rule, not Reichland. That's the weird bit about this, that they've moved the center to Reichland. It was Nuln. And Nuln was the center of the electoral emperors. And now it's shifted to Reichland because that's what Reichland became much later.
Yeah,
they basically pulled that back in time.
Despite the fact they're like, oh, it's an old world setting. They're trying to frame it on the 8th edition timeline setting, which is weird. A weird decision. In my opinion, an unnecessary decision. But
I think it would have been nice to have the Reichland on the outside. Because it's going to become much later the core of everything. It would be nice to see that story develop, but nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
Sinan, thank you very much. That's very generous of you. Thank you so much. Appreciate the sweet message. All right.
Are we done that section? If we are, I'd like to say something because I do believe every once in a while we should say a little thing, and that is that today, well, almost today, is Sotek's birthday. You will probably already realize this, given just how many people have been saying, "Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday!"
It's unrelated.
To you. Happy birthday, dear Sotek! Happy birthday to you! So if you're out there and you love everything that Sotek's doing, there's a few things that you must do. Number one, if you're watching this right now, you're on one of his channels. Click subscribe. Do it right now. Click like. Show just how much you love all the time that he spends reading all of these books, devouring every single last snippet of lore that he can, so he can then regurgitate it back to you onto the screen.
Wow, what a delightful way to put what we do.
I do love to bring up a beautiful metaphor, so that you can consume it yourself with a spoon at your end. Let's move off the regurgitation metaphor. But beyond that, it is his birthday. If you would like to say thanks to him in a different way, the fiscal way, today's the day to do it. Do please drop in a super chat just saying happy birthday if you are in a position to do so. We're not asking you to do that, because if you're not in a position, we'd much rather you just watch, share our videos, do whatever. But if you are in a position to do so, or if you've always thought, you know what, I'd like to drop in something for Sotek, today's the day. Literally every single last cent that isn't stolen by YouTube or Twitch will be given to good old Sotek because it's his freaking birthday. So thank you very much, Sotek. You are a scholar and a gentleman. Without you, we would not be doing so much of this and having such a laugh.
Thanks, all. Man. And thanks to you that I have those emojis thanks to a happy birthday message now. It's going in the book, Andy. It's going in the book.
Yeah, well, you know, I do like to keep you busy.
Yeah. Okay, Bretonnia. You ready to hop in?
Bretonnia. Bretonnia is actually, I found, a relatively easy one.
This section has some cool shit.
Yeah, it did.
This one, I honestly think this one's almost pure hype.
Yeah, pretty much.
I really like that they go out of their way to call out that the Bretonnians didn't just move in right when Bretonnia was founded, but they actually moved in much earlier. And were fighting for a long time against greenskins and beastmen and undead from the sea, which got me excited at first because I was like, Vampire Coast? And then I realized they were talking about the Tomb Kings. But yeah, I'll take what I can get. Seafaring undead, close enough. Even if they're bony boys instead of my favorite wet vampire goofs. Here they talk about Gilles Breton stuff. None of this is new. They talk.
I'm gonna interrupt because it just made me laugh. Happy birthday, regurgitation!
Oh man, that is the sexiest birthday message I've ever gotten in my life.
Hi, Sticks and Stones. And of course, one from Sean Steele. Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, you're all good. You're all good.
But thanks very much. They were lovely.
The other thing I really, really like is that in the Lady of the Lake section, they call out once again that the Bretonnians are polytheistic. They don't say
Yes, they
like,
do.
oh, they only worship one god. No, they're like, oh no, they worship all the other gods, and they still do. However, now there is a new preeminent goddess, being the lady, which I thought the wording of this was quite nice. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, me too. It was something that has been debated a significant amount by licensees, as in people that are holding a license for Games Workshop goods and trying to write Games Workshop stuff. Because if you look to the army list as they've been presented previously, it'd be very easy to conclude that the only religion at all that you would find in Bretonia was that of the Lady of the Lake. And if you go back to the original version of it, as presented, I think it was Nigel Stillman when he wrote it, it pretty much is the Lady of the Lake. And that got eroded by various books over the course of time, particularly on the roleplay side. But it was never really properly spelled out in black and white in what is the most important products, which is the Warhammer game itself. And here it's in black and white, and I think very clearly written in a way that's inclusive and properly supportive of the polytheistic world that Warhammer is. I also really like that. Good addition.
Yep. Between the little bits about her in the Lady of the Lake section and then the Arcane Journal, it seems to me they're pretty heavily implying again that the Enchantress is an elf, which is great.
Agreed.
They call it out, especially in the Elise Duchard section of the Arcane Journal, which is one of the new special characters. But we'll talk about that on a later day.
Yes, we will.
Her name is so fun. Duchard is a very fun, easy Bretonnian name to say. Some of the names are not so easy. That one's just fun.
Yeah, at least the shard is pretty easy.
The Might of Bretonia. Okay, the Knight of Bretonia one is really fun because they actually explain why Bretonia does not have advanced technology. They go out of their way to talk about that because of the fact that the dukes and all the Grail Knights and stuff live for so long, that is a good thing and a bad thing. And that they're like, it's good because you have stable rulers that rule for a long time, but it's bad because they're stubborn and they don't like change, which affects Bretonia culturally as well as technologically in war, which I'm really happy they go out of their way to mention that, because it can be confusing to play a Bretonnian army against an Empire guy, be like, why does this asshole get guns and cannons and I get arrows and a trebuchet?
Yeah, so this is actually one of my favorite little sections as well. Because I have to bitch about something, don't I? I will say that again, we've got ourselves there's really only 3 pages worth of material for the Bretonnians. Compare that to this, plus a picture, so 4 you could say. Compare that to the 7 for the Empire, which I find interesting to begin with. But all
the other factions have very few pages.
Yeah, this one could be cut, because it's literally nothing to do with this book. It's about Bretonnian culture, which is super cool for me to read. Super delighted that it's in here. Super unimportant for this book. And indeed, the only thing that's really important for this book is, where did it come from? Who are they today? How do they manifest? That's basically it. So we've got that so far. Lady of the Lake, pretty important. The Knights of the Realm and the Peasants, and then a little bit about Crusades and the Orc Slayer, so that we get it grounded into the current date. I can go with that, but the Mighty Bretonia, most of this section, not really that important, but it does provide context for it. I'm not just happy it's in there, I'm delighted. But I think this is again another example of a section that could easily have been a full page shorter and still contained all of the same information. That Mighty Bretonia one could easily have been a half paragraph and still contained the same amount. There is some interesting editing choices in terms of how much they are including and all the stuff they chose not to include.
Yep, I will say, I love it. Just jump in and say, screw the editing. Look at this cool note for a second. One of the things I love in the Great Crusade section, it mentions the places that they lead crusades to. So in the older lore, it's like, oh, they crusaded like against the Greenskins and like the Border Princes, and then they got their asses handled eventually by Morgul Neck Snapper, and they, the crusade to Araby. But this book goes out of the way to say, no, they've done Arabies to Norsca, Araby, and Albion. There's been a crusade to Albion?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And Norsca as well, which I find particularly interesting. Lands of the Dead, pretty much expected. But Albion, that was a lovely little inclusion. And speaks to the overall capacity that Bretonia has. I really liked this. I thought it was lovely. but I will reiterate, it feels like much of this information could easily have been siphoned down into a double-page spread almost for the Bretonnians, and the rest of it going over
it should have been in this book.
In that book, the book he's holding.
Which it's not, which is
and it's really weird. It's just weird because we're getting lots of information that if you're not playing Bretonnians, you literally don't care about. You need enough to understand them, not enough to know the finer points of why they are the way they are. And that should be grounded into the book that's, well, being held right now by Sotek.
This book does not have any history of Bretonnia in it. It's got geography, a little bit, not a lot. It's got some geography. It's got some here's some unit stuff, and it's got the current history, which is the War on the Border Princes. None of this. Like they've purely put the old history into the core rule book, which they shouldn't have done that. They should have just, the core rule book should just be the most basic bitch information and make this book like 80 pages instead of like 30, maybe 25.
Or maybe even add an extra, it's amazing what you can do with a clever edit and good layout. You could easily have included all this information and more inside the existing page count that they have without significantly impacting the overall spreads and their impact.
Yeah.
But it is a weird inclusion.
The actual lore content, awesome.
It's great.
I love the Orc Slayer stuff. Like they do a really good job of talking about Lone Orc Slayer, who he is, what he's doing. I like they didn't change his lore. He's been on the throne for 80 years. He took over in 2201. That's the exact same as it was. So he is gonna die. He is gonna die so hard. Really
and that being the case, why the fuck is he in the core book?
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
If they're going to be writing him out as they murder him, it should be in a book that's context related. This material here should be all general stuff. That's going to apply even when the old world, assuming that it's successful, moves towards the destruction of all things as Azvarkul comes down from the north. I will
say, if they do if they're going to do multiple editions and they end up releasing another core book later, which I can't see them doing because the core book is so expensive and big, then like they could do.
Then I'll have a completely different reason to bitch.
Yeah, that's fair. Because like on one hand, it's like, yeah, it's silly they added them in here, I guess, unless they're going to do another book later, but they better not do another book for like at least 6 or 7 years.
I'll go 4, maybe 5. If, for example, it's super successful and through the course of play, they realize that half their rules need to be rewritten. 5 years doesn't seem so bad as long as it doesn't invalidate all the various army lists that they've already released.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. And then completely out of fucking nowhere.
Here we go.
Kingdoms.
Yeah, well, they kind of had to, I suppose, because it's going to have to be in there given where they're starting off their campaigns.
That's true, but they wander hardcore off topic about halfway through this.
Yeah, they really do. I mean,
Southern Kingdoms, it starts off making perfect sense for the setting. Like Border Princes aren't really a faction. They're more like the other factions, but in a different place. You know, it's like a Border Prince army is literally just a Bretonnian army or a Kislevite army or an Empire army or whatever, but you're in a different place and you have access to mercenary units. That's all the Border Princes are. The lore does, like, this explains in 4 paragraphs, basically that. Border Princes, it's a dangerous place to live in, but there's all sorts of cool shit there. A lot of people go there because they're greedy or got exiled at the end.
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same as the Border Princes always have been. So there's little there that I don't like. Oh, pardon me, a push game just started beside me. Press little buttons. Put that away.
I didn't realize I was boring you so much that you.
I apparently had picked up and didn't even realize it was in my hand. So ignore that, everyone. Let's carry on swiftly. Beggar lords.
So where the last section focuses specifically on like kind of the people of the Border Princes, Beggar Lords focuses on the rulers.
It's an interesting title, Beggar Lords. I think.
And basically Beggar Lords, it breaks down into, they literally just if you go look at theoldworld.com and look at the map they have an interactive map where you can, which me and Andy will do a stream on. A stream after the core rulebook. And then we'll go into like the Forces of Fantasy and then Ravening Hordes and all that shit. What's interesting is that this calls out every single one of those characters. And kind of it doesn't give really much in the way of info about them. It basically is just like, these guys are kind of good guys. These guys are kind of neutral-ish assholes. And these last couple guys are real fucking dickheads. That's it. Like, so, it kind of just puts them into camps and then moves on.
I do have one relatively large issue for their Border Prince material, and that's that they have forgotten that the Border Princes isn't just these rival camps rising, falling, rising, and falling. There's also some very old kingdoms that have been there for a very, very long time, old princedoms. And
is there one that might pertain to a certain road?
Yeah, well, I was very amused to see that they included the Kypros road without the Cyprian road, pardon me, without including Kypros, which is what it's named after, one of the oldest ones. Effectively, they're almost a Greek city-state that were in the center of the Border Princes. But depending on which version of the Border Princes you go with, some of them have got almost Romanian style names. One or two of them literally lifted, like say Brasov from Romania. There's some of them have got more Greek style, some of them are more Balkanized. There's lots of different types of names that have been dropped in the area. But one thing you can say almost without contradiction is each book that's dealt with the Border Princes have always said it's a patchwork of ancient places and loads of new places that rise and fall extremely quickly. And they've only gone for the second part of that, entirely ignoring the idea that there could be anything that's lasted for longer than maybe 20 years down in this area. And in some respects, that invalidates the great desire to grab land down there, because there is nobody there that has any real sense of belonging or time or consistency. They're just being wiped out by orcs every 30 years. So there's clearly there's a lore piece that has been entirely ignored here, and it doesn't upset me much, but it does upset me a bit because it makes the Border Princes less characterful. They don't have any of their own unique kingdoms that have been around for a while.
They could have just added one or two sentences onto the first paragraph, because the first paragraph is like, there are a few kingdoms that have lasted multiple generations, and they could have just given like 2 examples.
But generations is nothing. Okay, for example, if it's multiple generations of elves or dwarves, that's something. But we're talking, I mean, Kypros was said to be about 2,000 years old. That's a proper ancient, and that's almost as old as the Empire itself. They've got records from the Empire invaded down through the Border Princes and tried to claim it for themselves during around about 800 IC, 900 IC. Around about that point, they even created a province on the other side of the mountains as they claimed all the land for themselves. And it's been around for a while. There's a few others as well, right down along the coastline that are proper ancient. And it would have been nice to have a hint of that. It didn't need to be there. It could have been nothing more than there are some ancient civilization, even if it's just ruins or whatever. But yeah, no.
Yeah, that would have been nice, because reading this section, they literally have it broken up into look how every human nation has a place here. Like, they literally break it down by where these people are from, where they're like, oh, look, here's some Empire guys, here's some Bretonnian guys, here's some Talayan guys, some Estalian guys, some a Kislevite guy, Norscan guy. Like, it's
what about the Border Princes?
Yeah, apparently there are no natives to the Border Princes, which is weird.
Literally no one is born there.
Yeah, no.
What? It's just really weird, the angle that they've taken. They've basically said all the factions that we have elsewhere, we're going to put here fighting each other, and there is nobody here already. And there never was. And all the names that came from here that might be ancient or some otherwise are just made up recently, one presumes. It's a bit weird.
Yeah. But
still pretty good.
Next sections, which I will make fun of for the Free Cities of Talea, the Dogs of War. I am very excited about these sections. However, the fact that the artwork above them is battle pilgrims. Why?
Oh,
but okay.
Oh, thoroughly unacceptable. What is that nonsense?
Very weird decision. But the Talea section is really fun. They do a good job talking about the merchant princes, and they talk about Remus for a good bit, and that Talea has a bunch of different cities that are all very, very different and have different ways of waging war. I really love that they reinforce the old lore that the Talaeans were the first people to discover the land route to Grand Cathay. because that actually got erased for a while.
It did.
Where
really nice detail.
Yeah, there's so the Chileans found a really goofy ass route to Grand Cathay. For those unaware, that instead of going through through the Darklands to the Mountains of Morn, across the Warpstone, circling, going like around the Warpstone Desert into battle pilgrims, into Grand Cathay, the Chileans went up. So they followed the World's Edge Mountains all the way north until they got to Zornu's Cool, and then they went up into the Eastern Steppes and they hugged the northern border of the Mountains of Morn until they hit the Great Bastion. That's how they got into Grand Cathay, which is hilarious.
An odd choice as well, given what they've done with Kislev these days. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all balances out.
Yeah. So Talea, I do like that they've called them out as like they're literally the ultimate traders. Like it even talks about that they were the first to discover the New World by boat. Very cool. So like I like that they're like Talea is the land of explorers, inventors. They bring up a lot of the cities and that their cities, and they talk about they have the most fabulous inventions and yada yada yada. Fucking love it.
Yeah, so basically what this double page spread does in terms of its words is it siphons down everything that was in the Dogs of War army list and drops it down into a 2-page spread to introduce Tilia. And I'm pretty cool with it. It does a pretty good job. The only thing I would like to have seen is the development of Tilia, because it's been moved on from that for about the last 20 years. And I would very much like to have seen at least one mention of Myrmidia, because Myrmidia is to Tilia in the same way that Sigmar is to the Empire, or the Lady is to Bretonnia. And the lack of Myrmidia really does speak to a lack of Myrmidia in Tilia's future in the old world, because it really should be there.
Yeah, they bring her up kind of in the Estalia section, but not the Tilia section, which is weird.
Not the Tilia section, exactly. So I would really like to have seen that. But beyond that, no, I'm pretty happy. It's a good section. It is super weird to see a bunch of Bretonnians sitting above it. I mean, they wouldn't do that again, would they? I mean, they wouldn't take a bunch of Bretonnians and just slap them over, I don't know, Estalian pages, would they?
Estalia has knights. Bretonnia has knights. We don't want to pay an artist to make new art.
As layout decisions go, that certainly was one.
Yeah. So the last thing
art director.
I will say the last thing that's fun about Talea section is that they do bring up Sartosa in the last paragraph, which is cool.
It's quite clear they're going to be focusing on Sartosa, because that's the only one they really do bring up repeatedly throughout the book.
Yeah. Kingdoms of Estalia. This is actually a bigger deal than it might seem. Estalia has never got this much information. Ever.
But like since almost 3rd edition, since the last time Estalia got anything worthwhile. It's been so long. Now you could argue there's been a couple of books every once in a while where they mention the Estalian kingdoms. There have been a couple of details in Black Library books, some of which indeed, like Fell Cargo, go right into Estalia, but bizarrely lay Estalia out like it's a jungle, which was a bit weird in that book. It was really very weird. Why has Estalia become a jungle? Who knows? But hey, I can't even remember who wrote that one. Who wrote Fell Cargo?
I don't know.
Dan. It doesn't really matter who wrote it. But yeah, there's been some really conflicting and weird details added about the place. So it's really nice to see that someone's just sat down and gone, you know what? We're going to spend as much time on Estalia as we did on Tilia. And not only that, we're going to commission some super marvelous art for some really cool... Oh, no, they didn't do that last night. No, sorry. We're going to just drop some Bretonnians on top, because clearly the Bretonnians are invading Estalia. Pay people, we can't do that.
We're only a £2 billion company. But yeah, so Kingdom of Estalia. This one's super interesting. They literally come out and say the first land settled by humans in the old world, Estalia.
Yep.
Okay.
Call out directly.
Fascinating.
Super. And that single sentence, I remember, I think I even wrote that down as a quick detail. There, I did. Super awesome. I did on my little notes over there. It's super awesome, and they don't mention it in the timeline, which is I feel ridiculous.
The Rise of Men.
What is this book called? The Old World. Okay, and this is a part of the Old World, one of the largest areas in the Old World. The first place that was properly settled in the Old World. No mention.
Well, I just love that we had that Rise of Men section, and they don't talk about the first place settled by humans, apparently.
Yeah, but we do get an idea of when the dates probably are, though, because we know the Bretonnian and the tribes of Sigmar all enter the Reich Basin and over into Bretonnia around about 1,000 to 500 before Sigmar. And we know Estalia is first. We know Tylos is before that by a good 500 years or so. So 1,000 to 1,500. So Estalia is probably around about 2,000 years before Sigmar. That gives it a pretty ancient history, particularly when you then couple it with the fact that both the Estalians and the Tileans were very closely related to Myrmidia. So that suggests that good old Myrmidia has been successfully helping the Estalians along for a good, well, pretty much 4,500 years.
Which I
okay,
like. I like a lot.
I really like that, but it does pay a nonsense to the line that they drop in the Empire one, where it's like, and Sigmar founded an empire that lasted right through to the end times themselves, as if it that feat, that 2,500 years of empire that he managed to install.
It's like, yes, technically he did, but that's not that impressive.
Well, technically he didn't. It fell apart.
Oh,
it completely collapsed. Magnus was the one that established the empire that lasted through to the end of the end times, I suppose, and that lasted 200 years. Not very long at all, but Sigmar founded what he then developed further. But the kingdoms of Estalia, they predate them all, and I really love it. I love the extra details. I love the way the ruling families are described, the way that their trading is described. They've just added extra detail.
Yeah,
They've got
they're big
huge military fleets. That's great. Also, I will say though, it does lead to many of the established pieces of lore for the High Elves and how they rule the seas. Because High Elves will never. No, that's a completely different thing. They completely rule the oceans.
Yeah.
And all the trade routes are controlled by the High Elves at this point. That's not loosened until approximately 150 years from now by Finubar, the seafarer. And Finubar, that's the Phoenix King of the High Elves, will make significant changes to how the High Elves work on the sea. But at this point, the High Elves will sink any boat that's out of sight of the coastline. Any. They just don't stop. Meaning that those that sneak through have had to get past the High Elf net. So what we've got here is a massive fleet, which is really quite interesting, of mercantile ships as well, because they're a merchant nation.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that it knows that it's like each of the... So Estalia, the thing I really like about Estalia is it's a whole bunch of kingdoms that get along sometimes, don't get along other times. So like they kind of have that in common with Talea, though Talea is more...
Or the Empire.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the Empire.
But it's like you have all the but it's like each of the kingdoms individually has only a small fleet of war vessels, but there's like tons of merchant ships because Estalia is all about that bank, and they're trading with Barak Var, and they're trading with Marienburg and all this stuff, which is great. I love that they're connecting all the different like major ports in the world. And the other thing that's really fun about them is I love that they call out how they fight specifically, where they're like, the Estalians are all about crossbow and pike. That is their shit. It's like, yeah, they do have mercenaries, but they say the big thing for Estalia is cavalry formations, which is cool, and crossbow and pike. Like those are the things they are good at.
Yeah, I had an Estalian army back in the day. I had about 2,000 points of Estalians. Loved them dearly. The old metal model Estalians, which all look like conquistadors, with their big long, they look more like spears, let's be honest, rather than pike. But if they bring any of these out, I'm buying them because I'm a child. I loosely love that section.
And then it is silly to me that they talk about the Templar Knights of the Holy Orders, but they don't mention the gods that the Holy Orders serve. They're just like Knights of the Blazing Sun. If you know, you know.
But the Knights of the Blazing Sun are an empire order. They're literally an empire order. They're an order founded by empire soldiers.
Not anymore.
Who went down to Estalia. During one of the crusades. Also, we're talking like 1,000 years ago or so.
Got their asses saved by a statue. Yep.
Got their asses saved by a statue that pretty much fell down. Saw the great engineering marvels of the Estalians, hiked it back, having had their asses saved, to the Empire, and said, hey, Myrmidia is cool. And they're like, Myrmidia who? And they established the Knights of the Blazing Sun. It's very much an empire order, but here they are. Orderly orders such as the Knights of the Blazing Sun, which is really not what they were. They've basically rewritten them from the ground up. And we are talking probably around about 60, 70 pages worth of lore, loads of novels, loads of stuff. If they just make them Estalian, it's a complete rewrite.
To me, this feels very much like, okay, we know the Knights of the Blazing Sun are Myrmidian, so we're going to put them here because we don't want to come up with a Talayan specific example.
There's already established orders that are down in Tilia.
Not as famous as
these Myrmidia, but they're not as famous as them. Exactly. I mean, as they were presented, say, for example, in the online game, and so that's
Warhammer Online.
Warhammer Online. Knights of the Blazing Sun were chosen because they were from the Empire. And they made a good ones who wandered around because they often wandered by themselves. It's a nonsense. It's a little bit like saying, I don't know, the hands of Karakora should move.
Yeah, I would have loved to see them maybe bring up like 2 or 3 orders, but they're all like established Talayan ones or just new ones. It felt so like that to me. That feels like, oh, this is a famous thing. Here, look, famous thing. You know what this unit is.
Super lazy and super uncreative.
Then the last thing we got are the Southern Wars, which is more about Estalia, which is fun. Once again,
it is
spread for Estalia. Here they bring back the lore about the vampire lord Nordgul, which is a fun story.
Nordgul.
And here's where they bring up Myrmidia. And they call her the patron of the Estalians, not Talayans and Estalians.
I know,
just Estalians.
I know, which is weird because even Dogs of War, the 5th edition army list, goes into some significant measure for marking out how important. How important Myrmidia is to the Tilians. It's one of the reasons that when we updated it for, so we're talking 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and Myrmidia got completely rewritten to incorporate everything that come out of the studio about Myrmidia. I did a quick ping over and they said, yes, everything stands for Estalia as well. So it got written for Tilia and Estalia, and Myrmidia got rewritten from that. And here, again, another rewrite. The patron of the Estalians. I mean, she is the patron of the Estalians, but she's also the patron of the Tilians. It's one of the reasons why the Myrmidian cult is the largest in the old world. It's larger than the cult of Sigmar by an enormous amount because Sigmar is really only big in the Empire, in the same way that the Lady is only really big in Bretonnia. So, yeah, Myrmidia, huge goddess, has been massively demoted.
Yeah, granted, in Talea, they just don't mention any gods.
Yes,
so
they don't,
it could be that's just a small oversight, but hard to say.
Yeah, hard to call.
But, yeah, I like this. Talks about Araby has apparently invaded multiple times to the point where there are Arabian rulers who are now just Estalian kings and queens because they just stayed there so long that they were like, we're Estalians now, which that happens.
I do have one note over there that I'm going to bring up. So I would have got it. Thanks, yesterday's Andy, for writing that note. In the last paragraph, as recent as the 15th century, as reckoned by the imperial calendar.
Oh, the imperial calendar's not. Wait,
we've already got it established earlier on that the imperial calendar. What?
This is the first mention of the imperial calendar.
Yeah, it is. That suggests a different writer. And that suggests that they should have just used the imperial calendar throughout.
Yeah.
Because that it's the primary calendar as known by most of the old world. It's for each of the individual realms have got their own way of according their dates. Kislev is completely different to the Empire, which is different to Bretonnia et al. Nevertheless, it's a good core system that they all understand. It's a little bit like Reichsspiel is somewhat of a lingua franca, which is ridiculous because lingua franca literally means obviously the French language, but the French language is used as the lingua franca for Europe in the same way that the old world uses largely Reichsspiel as its lingua franca. It's the language that everyone's most likely to learn because the primary trading ports of the old world and the biggest cities are all in the Empire, including Marienburg, including Altdorf, including Nuln. Yeah. So, I find that an interesting change. Is it a change? We'll find out. I also am very amused at the inclusion of the imperial calendar there when they could have just said 15th century, they're running by the other ones, or run with whatever dates they went with, but they didn't.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Fascinating.
I did like the Southern Realm section overall a lot.
Me
it's
too.
Nice to see them get focused on.
It is.
Gonna get caught up on Super Chats real quick. Bethy Apper, because of the announcement of the Old World RPG, do you think that all the material for Bretonnia that was planned for 4th edition will be shifted there? Not necessarily. It could be. But
I think it's more likely that there is no material plan for Bretonnia and they will do some for the Old World.
Yeah, that is probably a better way to put it.
Yeah, that seems more likely.
Yeah, I have not heard even like whispers of a Bretonnia update for 4th ed yet. Like I've heard about like because we just got the Greenskin book. It released like last week. Very fun book, very enjoyable. I like it a lot. But I think I've heard a lot of rumors about like a big dwarf book. Well, no, it wasn't a rumor. They confirmed it at like a con. I haven't heard anything about Bretonnians. So it could be that I think they would do well for an old world book because like Knights of the Grail is pretty easy to translate into 4th edition. But it's going to depend for me. It's going to be interesting to see what the old world system is. Like I'd be shocked if it's just the same system but in a different time because that would feel like kind of a waste.
Yeah.
As opposed to if it's a genuinely different system, well, okay, like I could see that being interesting. Kind of like how like the Age of Sigmar system is a D6 system versus Warhammer Fantasy, which is the D100 system. Like they could do another system just to diversify more. But I don't know. I have no idea. We'll see.
Learning more rules. Yay.
Yeah. But
hey!
That's the thing now, I guess. What are your thoughts on the change to gender roles in Bretonnia? It makes so much sense. It's so here's the thing. The old system of gendered Bretonnians didn't make sense. That was the problem. Is that like I could maybe see the argument that up until Reponse they had that system, but after Reponse happened, there's no fucking, and even that doesn't make sense at all.
It doesn't.
Like
it's seen through the lens of real world gender politics and capabilities. We are dealing with a magical place where people can be elevated far beyond their normal physicalities, regardless of whatever gender they may present as. It literally makes no difference. Once you have drunk from that grail, you are a superhero. You are donning your cape and kicking ass and chewing gum. It makes no difference. And anyone can strive for that, particularly if you do subscribe to the elven influences there, where gender to elves means so little in comparison to what it means to humans, and so much more in other ways. They're a different species, but they do not hold back men or women from any particular outcome, or indeed anyone that lies outside of said binary. It's just a better outcome. It makes more sense for Bretonnia. There are many places in the old world where I think gender should be a limiter in a variety of ways, because it's a horrendous place that does a lot of horrific stuff, and it's fun to limit men or women in different ways in different places for different reasons, because it speaks to a host of real world stuff that you can understand, but not necessarily enforce on people, particularly if you're playing the roleplay game, because people don't want to go from their real life horror and then go into a world where it's, if anything, worse, which is what it was in Bretonnia. The sexism in Bretonnia was beyond strong and made no sense when you looked into the background of what instigated it. So my one here, I not only think it's a better idea, I think it is an exceedingly better idea, and I will defend that corner relatively hard. But I will also defend corners elsewhere where I think that gender divide should stay, because it tells stories that are worthwhile and they make sense within the context of the world. Because in the end, the stories that we tell are often examining the human condition. And if we remove things like gender, then it's more difficult to examine certain aspects of the human condition. And that is worth doing.
Yeah. But like, say what you want about the old world, just the fixes they've done to Bretonnia alone, I'm like, this was worth it. Like the whole fucking thing is worth it just to have the update to Bretonnia of that. Like the Arcane Journal goes super out of its way in in the Forces of Fantasy book to talk about how like boys and girls in Bretonnia that are noble are expected to know how to fight. And like they can be blessed by the lady. And it's like, yeah, like especially here's the whole thing is that like even in the old lore, it was so dumb and didn't make any fucking sense in the first place, but it was super extra dumb that Reponse happened and then they just went back to the way it was after she died. Which, like, what? Like, Bretonnia is literally saved by a woman knight who was blessed by the lady, and she became a duke, or a duchess in that case. And then they were like, oh, yeah, no girl knights. It's like,
yeah, it's just, It felt like sexist writing, not this a sexist world causing that outcome.
Yeah, so
I would say, not deliberately sexist writing. It's not like the writer sat down and wanted to be sexist. It was more just an unconscious bias. They were just replicating the past into a fantasy world and not thinking of the implication of the lady herself and the sort of nation that she would build around. And you've got to remember, there's one thing that you can say for certain about the lady. She's quite unlike most of the other goddesses out there. And if you don't understand quite how much, go check our stream on the lady. We dive deep into that stuff and we come up with some pretty, I think, solid conclusions concerning exactly who she probably is, regardless of what she became.
Mr. Bloodweaver, could the jungle in Estalia be from invasive plants from Lestria, since they and Talay are checking out the new world, given Lestria plants are deadly? As hilarious as that idea is, the environment, the environment and climate of Estalia is probably not very healthy for Lestrian plants. They would.
So I say go do it.
Yeah. That being said, there is a hilarious story to be told about some idiot bringing back Lestrian plants and it taking over like a village or something and turning it into a jungle. That is a genuinely good story. Sean Souls, does Barak Var ever support the Border Princes? Yeah, absolutely. Like when they're dealing with like greenskin threats and stuff, and they trade with them, and if there's a reason for them to, then yeah, they would.
Yep, absolutely.
Arinthial, do you find Cathayans in the Border Princes? Yes.
Yeah.
There is not a if you're like talking about like the map, there is not a pointed out Cathayan character. But Cathay also has its own full faction thing going on.
Yep, absolutely.
And to be fair, the Border Princes is a long way from Cathay. Marathi, just sitting in Gron eating ice cream and crying. My baby boy changed his name, and his feet pics are more popular than mine. Happy birthday, I guess.
You pathetic human.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. I will say one more time. I like the name change.
Yeah. I do too. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Time for one of the weirdest sections in this book.
The Wood Elves.
The Enchanted Wood.
The Wood Elves.
Yeah. The Elves of Athel-Loren section. Unless you have anything specific, to me, it's kind of like it's not that different.
So for me, the Wood Elf section was somebody who read the army list and just distilled it down. There was, however, one title, and you'll know which one it is, just really pissed me off. Just one.
Hold up. So I want to point out that before, if it's the title of the section, I think it is.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. The paragraph before that spits in its face. So there's a paragraph that says,
"No,
it is fair to say that the Wood Elves have little in the way of allies, but rather a wide array of enemies in varying degrees." So it goes out of its way to say, no, the Wood Elves are dicks. They're isolationists. They hate everybody that's not themselves. They will like gladly lure Beastmen Brayherds into Empire towns and massacre those people just so they're not attacking the Wood Elves. Like these are not good people. They might have like an overall noble objective of like protecting like, you know, the nature of the world, but they're not good. And then the next paragraph after it is like, they don't have any allies. Everybody hates them. They're awful. The title says, I'm
going to bring it up.
Good.
A force for freaking good.
Like
Look at that.
The whiplash on that is crazy.
Okay, so this is a classic example of where they have fundamentally misunderstood what Warhammer offers. And they have tried to make it good versus evil, when all of the stories that they're drawing from, when all of the background that they're patching together to create this book isn't about good versus evil. It's about order and civilization and consistency versus chaos, unmaking, and destruction. And the Wood Elves are certainly a force of order, but they are not a force for good. And by that, I mean, they will murderalize anyone to get their own ends. And indeed, that's pretty much what this section says, while simultaneously saying that murderalizing anyone to achieve your own end goals is fine. Now, if you go out into the real world right now, and you go to any of the war zones, you'll see people justifying that sort of shit. And that's why I don't like this. I really don't like this, because this is going into a febrile world where people are trying to justify war as good, killing people who are innocent as a good moral thing. And this book also says that, and it's unjustifiable. I cannot stand the good versus evil they've slapped on their books, because it creates a mindset where we can have other nations invading others because that's a good thing, right? Yeah. Oh, I'll get on a high horse. I don't like it, and they've hard coded it in here.
And you're gonna fall. You're gonna fall up there. It's too high.
I will say though that generally I really quite like the Wood Elf section. It's pretty good. I don't, however, for all it's pretty good, accept the A Force for Good title.
Yeah, well, it's so lazy and it's so unnecessary. Like Age of Sigmar is like, oh, look, we split it up into allegiances of order, destruction, chaos, and death.
I'm going to bring up a comment. I don't do this very often. I'm going to bring this up because, yeah, just fucking imagine if they did that. And they're doing it to my Warhammer. God damn it. They're making my Warhammer black and white and dull. They're taking away all of its color and saying that everything is either black or white, and they define black as bad and white as good. And that is a horror show if ever I saw one. The whole thing is just
well, it's the whole thing of it smacks of someone who is high up and doesn't understand or really care being like, I want these words. I don't care how you have to fit them together. I want these words, make it work. Because it doesn't
else good.
Nope. Like when you're reading it, it reads like the writer is going, I don't really agree with this, but I have to put this in. So I'm gonna squeeze this in to point out how obnoxiously odd it is.
Yeah, the Dark Elves are, I think it's easy to say the Dark Elves are objectively evil. From particularly an outside morality, but from their perspective, they're not, because they stand against chaos. They believe they're the rightful rulers. So simply calling them evil is wrong.
Well, it's like in Age of Sigmar, super simple. They go, oh, order. And they go, order doesn't have good guys. It's just people that build civilization. And it's got Daughters of Cain and the Free Cities of Sigmar. Like, even though, like, the Daughters of Cain are pretty fucking nasty. They're an order faction. I just don't understand why they introduced this concept when it doesn't exist in any of their other settings. It doesn't exist in the setting that this is based off of, and it doesn't make sense for this setting. It just feels so lazy and forced, and it's weird.
It is, and I think that we're going to be saying this again at some point as we move through it. So let's just draw a loose line underneath this and say that the simplification of Warhammer in this book is egregiously wrong, because they are presenting a world that is not just full of shades of grey, it is absolutely redolent with color as well. It is deep, it's complicated, it's structured, and it's awesome. There's so much great detail, and they're replicating that detail on their pages. That's what makes it particularly egregious. It's not that they're changing it and saying, actually, they are 100% evil or 100% good. What they're doing is they're saying they're pretty complicated, but they're a force for good. They're pretty complicated, but they're a force for evil. Or sometimes, in the case of Malerion, actually, they're not complicated at all. They're just a force for evil. I find it unfortunate. So I'm just going to move on from that.
Okay,
I'll just rant all day about this one.
My last point is that even in the rules, it's weird. Because you think, oh, well, maybe they did this for rules because they're like, okay, if you're playing two good guy factions, you can ally and not have any problems. But that's not how it works. If you take allies in this game, there are levels of alliance. Like the Wood Elves in the Forces of Good Alliance are always treated as untrustful allies, no matter which good army you're playing. Which, like, what? Anyway, moving on. High Elves.
Right, so I'm going to call out one thing before we do the High Elf section, because we're now firmly into the section of the book that for the factions is well laid out. And that is, it opens up with a single image. So, for example, we're on to High Elves. We've got ourselves a lovely image. It's color, it looks pretty, and we have 3 pages. 1 page facing the image, and then a double page spread. And each of the factions does this. And they should have done that for the Empire, and they should have done that for Bretonnia. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, how Bretonnia and the Empire got an unexpectedly large amount of space that wasn't actually required because they were pinning down details that didn't actually matter for this book, where the details that they pinned down here are, broadly speaking, pretty decent. And they've already got a history section, so they don't need to go in the Ulthuan section, the Lords of Ulthuan, the Azure, the good old High Elves. They don't need to sit down in this section and say things like, oh, well, they were founded back then doing this, and they had great wars, the War of the Beard, War of Vengeance, whatever. That happened, and these things occurred because the timeline sections handled those. These bits are pretty well handled. Basically 2 double-page spreads for each one of the primary factions as you make your way through them. And they have clearly been told to fit within that, and they do it with a primary group, the Tomb Kings of Khemri, when they come up. Now, the Tomb Kings of Khemri, as we've noted, are a primary faction for the Old World game, and they're, again, working on just 2 double-page spreads. The fact that they didn't completely hold to that all the way through is not just a shame, it's literally a mistake. They just did not do it frightfully well.
Yeah. We'll say, lore-wise, Wood Elf section, other than that one little note we talked about, great. Awesome.
It's good.
High Elf section is...
We like it.
Yeah, High Elf section is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
The one
I'm going to call out something on the layout with that if you've got nothing to add on the other side.
I have 2 little lore things.
Go for it.
Which is obviously the biggest change to the lore, which I'm actually very excited about because it makes so much sense for the High Elves, is that it goes out of its way to say the High Elves have returned to the old world. That once shit with the dwarves cooled down and was no longer like really, really bad, that with Finnebar's big contribution before becoming Phoenix King is that he has reestablished a great many garrisons along the coast of the old world, which is really good and is a very nice change for the High Elves, because in the old lore, it was very strange that the High Elves were like, we're the dominant sea force and we hang out in the old world, but they didn't have any like official, it's like, oh, we've got the Tower of the Sun and the Tower of Dawn, or Citadel of Dusk and the Citadel of Dawn and the Tower of the Stars and all this other shit, but they didn't have a single tower or building anywhere in the old world. Was so weird. So this new lore where it's like, no, the elves have returned. Those of their towers that have not been inhabited and built on by humans, they took back over. They've even built some new ones. They built some towers in the Badlands, which makes a lot of sense. Though those are going to get fucked very quickly because of the whole Cetra invasion thing. Poor Toran Rock, rest in peace. But this, I really, really like that it follows this, and that the elves have kind of in the Shadow of Chaos section, it notes that the High Elves are keenly aware that one of those waves of chaos is coming again, which they would be aware of because they could literally feel that rise coming into the world, and that they're sending out envoys everywhere. They've got envoys in Estalia, envoys in Araby, envoys in Talea and the Empire. And like, they've got people running around trying to like not force the humans, but manipulate them. It even talks about that they're talking to End and Nippon and Grand Cathay. Like they're talking to every single human faction they can get their greedy little paws on to try and manipulate them into doing what they want them to do, which is work against chaos, which I really like, because that's the High Elves at their best in a lot of the ways with geopolitics, is they're political. High Elves are one of the most political factions in Warhammer Fantasy. It is a huge part of their narrative, and I'm really glad that this leans into that.
Yeah, so am I. I have one issue with it, though, and that's the timeline. I don't think they've given the elves enough time to do it to the extent that they have. Because before Finubar, they had become almost entirely, let's say, xenophobic, like the Azrai, the Wood Elves. And the seas were theirs. Nobody else touched them. If you moved beyond the sight of land, you were sunk, meaning that trade hugged all of the major coastlines. The elves are already over the world, but they control their sites with absolute, let's say ferocity. and xenophobia. They're elves, and they're proud, and they're better than everybody else. Finubar completely erodes this, but that is something that takes more than a decade for the elves, and he's only been on the throne for just over a decade. It's not very long. He's barely been Phoenix King, and in that time, he has had to establish and enforce his authority and then push people out around the world doing something different. This is something for elves that takes time, and making it happen in just a decade is, for me, a bit of a stretch, but the story they're telling, I think, is super important. I would like to have completely duplicated all of this, but added an in progress. It's somewhat ramshackle, which is why some of it's already falling apart when it's challenged, because we know that one of the high elf places is going to fall, and that's quite fun. And it would be, I think, a bit better to show the nasty, backbiting nature of elven politics, to show that it isn't just simplicity for Finubar to change his entire species' last few thousand years worth of direction when it comes to geopolitics and world politics. He's completely changing everything. It'd be a little bit like if you're an American, having had a Republican president for the last 2,000 years, and our first Democrat coming along, coming in and going, hey, I'm going to change everything. Or flip it, a Democrat for the last 2,000 years, and a Republican saying, I'm going to change everything. Literally, all of the people would say, no, because this is the way we've done it for the last 2,000 years. People get entrenched, and elves, who are deeply emotional, and they get completely obsessed by whatever's in front of them, are, if anything, more so than humans. So I find the decade a touch too fast, but I really, really like it. So I find that I just want to massage it a little bit to try and make it land. No, the thing that I'm going to call out on this one is perhaps something that you might not realize, and that's the sidebar. It's got a sidebar. Yeah. Now, it's not the content. It's the fact that there is one. Because if you'd gone to any of the previous pages, pretty much throughout this book, you would think, oh, no, there's no point of having sidebars, because none of the background material has it. And one of the primary reasons not to include a timeline the way they've been doing it, I think there's a little bit in the beginning. I'm positive there's one somewhere. I'm trying to find it. I think there was one earlier.
Yeah, there's one for the relic priests.
In the beginning. There we go. Yeah, the rune magic bit there at the beginning. So they can use sidebars. So we could easily have had little timeline sections in those in other sections. It would have fit within the established setup and formatting for their text that they already have. And it's a bit of a shame that these sidebars were not used more effectively when we needed, as readers, better comprehension of what's going on. So I'm calling it that part. I really like the High Elf section. It's super easy for me to complain about one tiny point about Finubar. Please don't take that as an enormous complaint. It isn't. But it is a complaint that I feel should have been addressed, because he's barely been Phoenix King.
Yeah, that would be something to see. That would be nice to see more clarification on, is exploring that Finubar is relatively new to the throne, and that while he's establishing these garrisons, which they say in the Finubar section that they've only had a decade.
I'm bringing this up just to answer it relatively closely. No, ADHD is a human issue. Elves are worse. And I don't necessarily say that to be ADHD is terrible. Oh, my goodness. I mean, I have ADHD. But elves are completely alien in mindset, and their obsessions are much more real. And you got to remember, for an elf, everything is the first time. They experience everything. They rarely get jaded. They live for thousands of years and somehow don't get bored. And one of the reasons for that is the way their emotions work, the way that they are constantly in the moment in a way that other species certainly aren't. It makes them particularly difficult to deal with. I had loads of fun conversations with Gav Thorpe about this one, because he really enjoyed writing the Elves and the Eldar. Slightly different in both cases, but relatively similar. Oh, thanks there. Zonry number?
Message. Yeah, appreciate that.
That was really nice. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, I'm very generous.
Happy birthday to you. Moving along. I'm actually I'm pretty happy with the Elves. We now move on to the good old Dawi, which I've got a note somewhere, as I recall. I wrote one down, because this does confirm something which has pretty much rarely been completely confirmed, as I recall. Let me just double check my notes. Yeah, and that's all the way back at the beginning. The dwarves, right at the beginning, were basic.
Yes.
And that is extraordinary, because generally the ancestor worship that the dwarves had previously said that the ancestors had it better. The ancestor gods were the perfect example of this. And the ancestors, everything that they did was perfect. And since that perfect moment, everything has degraded, basically. And it's got worse and worse and worse and worse since the perfect beginning. Where now it's the dwarves were rubbish. The ancestor gods came along and elevated them and made them not rubbish, which is really a very different angle to take. And is, in terms of dwarven psychology, it kind of attacks it. It kind of attacks that old man in a shed view that things were better back in the old days. And, you know, a lot better back when back when our ancestors, they had it right. No, now the ancestors had it shit. If it weren't for ancestor gods, we'd have been nowhere. Well, thank goodness for the good old ancestor gods, because we'd have been but my great grandfather and mother, they were shit. No, that's so undwarven. It's just a weird, tiny little change where they're saying now that the dwarves birthed from the stone itself, and the old ones, pardon me, we all know it's the old ones that passed it over, but the ancestor gods effectively uplifted them by being almost like the gods of, say, the Mexican peoples back in the day, where they apparently arrived in and taught them how to do agriculture and uplifted them entirely and elevated them because they were the gods. And the dwarves are almost like that. They have had a significant change here, although it's a reading that could have been made in previous books as well. I find that, as the opening part, the Children of the Ancestors, utterly compelling and fascinating, because it changes the character of the dwarves, if they know this, so fundamentally.
Yeah, I feel like this also, there's always kind of that eternal conversation with a lot of people of like, are the ancestor gods just our oldest ancestors, therefore we revere them to an extent that humans are like, oh, they're your gods, or are they like actual gods? And this seems to push that needle significantly further in direction of, no, they are gods.
Yeah,
not
it's weird.
Simply just the really, really wise ancient first generation.
Yeah, I mean, read it directly. In these ancient days before the coming of chaos, the Dawi were cave dwellers who fashioned primitive tools from flint and eked out a living in the bleak and inhospitable mountains, where often, particularly amongst I've been in several writer circles who've been attempting to write dwarfy bits, but often for the original golden era of the dwarves, back when the old ones were around and they're elevated, they're living in an era of high technology, the ancestor gods providing them with more of that. It is the perfect era that can never be matched again. Chaos comes. Because the dwarves have already gone underground and they're prepared for it to a degree, this book confirms that, but they're still in an era of high technology, which then devolves as that war goes on, as everything they had disappears and is replaced with whatever they can manage to scrape together. Good old runes come in as an alternative way. As magic floods the world, they replace their tech with runes. It's a completely different version of the dwarves. It's no longer a species that was uplifted by the old ones and then moved off to wherever it was and devolve over time. This is a species that was shit, utterly rubbish, living a little caves, picking away. They're not even really mentioned here as being designed or uplifted or changed. These could be cave dwellers that were there and barely changed in the slightest, although it does say that the old ones changed them. To what end? Where is the proof? There is none of it anymore. It's gone. It's very clear on the High Elf side exactly what they were given over in Ulthuan, but with the dwarves, they have somehow jumped in and said everything that could have been the case for the dwarves that you thought was the case isn't. They're shit. The old ones did not improve them in any way that we're going to describe, but we do have the ancestor gods that came in and provided them with all of the civilization techniques they needed. They are the source of everything, not the dwarf ancestors, so to speak. It is, for me, just extraordinary, because it is confirming material that you could have at best said, well, it might be that, but that would be a bad reading of it. And they've gone for the bad reading, which feels so un-Warhammer in comparison to the tales that had been generally suggested were the case. So I'm not saying this is bad per se. I mean, it's nicely written. It's quite clear exactly how they're working it. They give a very clear idea of a primitive people that were given some extra stuff by their ancestor gods. They made their way up through the mountains and eventually formed the Karakanker as we know. But it does completely undermine, which I think is an appropriate word to use, but it does completely undermine the fact that the ancestors know better. It's not that anymore. It's the ancestor gods know better. And that is weird to me.
Yeah, that's a it's a significant cultural, like, it may not, if you're listening, it may not sound like, maybe like that doesn't sound like it's anything different, but that means it's less about the traditionalism and culture of your ancestors, and it's more about religion now, which is that's a huge shift for the dwarves.
It's massive. And to the point that I when I first read it, I went, am I reading this right? Am I reading this right? Oh yeah, this is God voice. This isn't some scholar's view that dwarves were once scrubbing away in the background. This is it. Holy moly, that's huge. Their golden age was always after the time of the old ones, when they re-established as much as what they could from what they had before. But their golden age is no longer that. Their golden age is now what they have managed to carve after the cataclysm, and that's the peak of their civilization that they then pull back from as the generations pass by. So the post-Great Cataclysm point is them at their peak, and that is, again, an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, that's a big shift. Because in the 8th edition lore, it's much more, you have your golden age, then the cataclysm, then you have more like a silver age.
Yeah, well, they've still got their silver age sitting in here. They've still got their time of woes.
They do still have the silver age. True.
It's all there,
like,
and
it's like adjusted now. Like the era before the cataclysm is now significantly less like, oh, this is when all the like batshit crazy stuff happened. Which is interesting. Like, I don't hate it.
It is. I don't hate it either. I just think it's a really interesting change. It does, though, for the old world, create a completely different version of dwarves. Now, you might think that it's pretty much exactly the same, right? Yeah, it's not. Their religion is different. Their culture is different. Their entire raison d'etre for their ancestors being respected and why they're respected has changed. There is never that almost platonic ideal of what it is to be a dwarf at the beginning, and then everything that has emanated from that point has grown significantly worse as you move away from the source. It's no longer the dwarf ideal of they did it better in the past, they just simply did, and we're attempting to grasp onto all the greatness they had. Innovation now seems like it would be a very clean dwarven trait, no longer one that would be frowned upon by many aspects of society, because they innovated up to the golden age. They did. That's what got them to the golden age. It wasn't the golden age came from a better age before or something else. Innovation is now good. The engineers raison d'etre, the engineers guilds raison d'etre, where they sit very firmly on claiming that tradition is better, no longer makes quite the same sense as it did before. Tradition, yes, for family, but tradition for innovation, no, we should be taking a more Victorian view. That makes more sense. Tradition, yes, but innovation as well. We should be using technology to better things, because that's what they did. And the fact that the Engineers Guild don't say that has been undermined. So clearly they've got to have a different reason culturally for doing that. So it means that, loosely speaking, all of dwarf society needs to be gently rewritten to match that. It's fascinating.
To be fair, like the kind of remaining sections are pretty much like just doesn't change.
It doesn't change at all. It's just the beginning.
Yeah, but the Silver Age section, I do like that it does specifically call out that High King Alricsson is really pushing for an age of invention. He's pushing for new tech,
and that's loosely new too. Because what dwarf king really does that? I mean, he should be.
I know, like the old lord was like, "Oh, Thorgrim is a very progressive king because he tolerates it."
Yeah,
as opposed to like pushing.
Yeah, exactly. Thorgrim, bloody heck! What the hell is he building over there? His cannon's a good 2 inches longer than a cannon should be. Oh, I'm not sure I like that. I say he should go back to drawing room. Oh, no. It's so different. While simultaneously the stories that they're telling with it are largely the same. So I'm fascinated by this because I don't know if it will make any difference to their writing at all. In that they'll just loosely ignore it. But I'm also fascinated because if they are going to use it, and particularly if you're writing a roleplay game, for example, you have to rewrite the dwarves from scratch, literally from scratch. Their culture has changed.
Yeah, they're
cool.
Yeah, there would be some really, really interesting things to explore there, which I'm excited to see what they're going to do with it. Because, like I said, don't hate it by any means of the imagination. It actually allows for some really interesting alternative looks at several things. All right, so let me get caught up on this really quick. Isian, thank you so much. Early thank you for the upcoming installment of the Uber Strike 7. Awesome. Any quick trips, Andy? Any quick tips for troll tracking?
That's they got big footprints. It's really difficult to miss
big footprints, and I would also say acid.
There's
acid on like stone and other things.
They're particularly easy to track because they are not the most cautious of creatures unless they're river trolls, where they're a little bit more difficult to keep your hands on. But even then, yeah, they're pretty easy to track. Plus, there's a host of fun stories of various types of using various pheromones from trolls to attract other trolls, which is always fun. So you don't necessarily need to track them. You can almost summon them by getting particular glands. There's a couple of Black Library style stories that do that. Happens in a roleplay section as well, which is super fun. So why track them when you can summon them? Yes.
All right. Greenskins. This section is kind of hilarious. Because oh my god, does it open with like instead of older books would have just jumped into modern greenskins and not worried about it. This book's like, hey, remember when we talked about the old ones? Well, these sons of bitches snuck onto their ships, and you go, oh, what? they did what now? Literally states directly that the orcs and goblins snuck onto, they were stowaways on at least one old one vessel that came to the Warhammer world, and then they spread out and started being a mess and stuff, which is really funny. It opens a lot of questions. You would figure that the old ones would have a pretty good customs program, being omnipotent, all-seeing time weirdos.
Right. So I'm going to put a different spin on this because I've had some time to consider this. When I first read this, I was like, you know what? I actually prefer spores. I can't believe I prefer spores because at least that feels like something that would be in the air, something that could happen, something that could be missed. Even spores to me felt a bit daft, not because they were using spores to procreate, and none of this orcs or mushrooms bollocks. They're not. Orcs are orcs. Greenskins are greenskins. They just happen to procreate in a different way to others, and they come out from the earth. What I found particularly disappointing was the idea that somehow the old ones could miss these fuckers. Because who could miss those noisy motherfuckers? Maybe some goblins at a stretch because they're sneaky. But orcs are not sneaky. They are not for the sneaky stabbing. I can just imagine them being marshaled onto the place. You have to be really, really quiet. Oh, won't be quiet.
They're very Morky orcs.
It's just not going to go down particularly well. There are some orcs that just would never survive. We would have a bizarre Darwinian situation where only the sneakiest would have got through, meaning that only the sneakiest would have survived. It's just all a bit weird. And then I realized what we discussed last week. The old ones did it on purpose.
That honestly
would be,
that would honestly be the easiest explanation. Is the greenskins think they snuck on, but
they
didn't.
They didn't sneak on.
They were brought on purpose.
They were transported. Okay, the way they were kept under control was to make them think that they were the ones that were in control. We're being dead cunning, we are, as they make their way through.
Yeah, the old ones being like, "Oh, I really hope no greenskins go in this box. That would be terrible.
That would be terrible. They'll never spot us." And that I could go with because the old ones, as they're depicted, just just this doesn't make sense. It's like it's written by a child who doesn't understand the rest of the material as it's been put together. And I think whoever wrote this is not that simple. It doesn't make sense. The spores you could accept just, but this is nigh on unacceptable. To the point that when I've read it for the first time, I barked out with laughter and went, bullshit. I just couldn't help myself. Funny as fuck, but bullshit. Seriously hilarious, just the idea of them creeping on. But you know, we all know what orcs are like. If you put them into a close environment, they'd be beating each other up.
Yeah.
There would be scraps, there'd be fights, there'd be goblins hiking out of there at top speed trying to avoid the worst of the fighting. Whatever types of greenskins that arrived on the Warhammer world, whether that was our hobgoblins, our goblins, our nobblers, our snotlings, our various types of races of goblins in a variety of ways, races of orcs, and we all know that the black orcs will be created from those. And quite all of those greenskins and the squigs and everything else, they'd be fighting. They'd be fighting a lot. And that being the case, you just have to look at that and say, this is stupid, really stupid. So how can we make sense of it? And the obvious answer is obvious. We have already determined from earlier on in the book that the entirety of the fall of the Warhammer world was to the old one's design. Now, it might not have been their only design. They might have preferred something better, but they knew from the very outset that the Warhammer world was special because it would create Age of Sigmar. And you might not like Age of Sigmar out there, but they were very much from the outset creating that. And the greenskins are a part of that big mess.
You know, this is super hardcore headcanon, but personally, I kind of love the idea that the narrator voice is correct, that the old ones are disappointed that the greenskins showed up, not because they snuck on, but what if it was just one old one who was like, no, the way I see this going down, we need these things. And he brings them, all the other old ones are like, God damn it, dude. We said we weren't going to use the greenskins. And he's like, well,
why do you always bring the greenskins in? Every single time we do a new experiment, bring in the greenskins. No! They screw it up every time.
That's my personal headcanon, is there's just that one asshole old one who brings the greenskins every time. Like
I do have a question, though. Is his name Kremlo?
Yeah, Kremlo's green, so I mean, and he's a dick. He's a fucking weird little guy.
Other than that, though, the sections here are largely what you'd expect.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, tribes beyond number. They're super angry. You've got orcs, you've got goblins, vindictive little bastards that they are, and you've got Mork and you've got Gork, or you've got Gork and you've got Mork. Cunning but brutal, or brutal but yet cunning, doing their thing. And they go through the basics of it. And I would say that this is another fine example of how they easily could have handled all of their sections for each of the factions. In that, an intro, full page spread, then you've got a description of what they are, made up with their primary forces and their god at the end. They did this pretty well with a nice little sidebar.
I will point out as well, I really like that because this is not something they've done very well at all in like 8th edition, 7th edition fantasy. In this section, in the Gork and Mork section, I really like, and they do this later with Wa magic. They point out that the Wa is not, it doesn't make sense. Like it is a form of energy that functions similar to magic, but it's not magic. Like it's a really fucking weird thing.
Yeah, it's wild magic, and I'm cool with that.
I'm glad they point that out.
Yeah, me too, because it's always how I've written it. So it's really nice to have my own personal preferences.
Like in 7th and 8th edition, it just comes off like it's another lore of magic. That's just it really does. Oh, like because before you and I had that talk where you really were like, I think it was during the Grom stream where you were really going on about like what Wa magic, how you interpreted it. I had always thought that it was just like Gur that the greenskins channel, through themselves and it turns green, which is like, all right. But this, I'm glad they tied this down.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, me too. I will point out one thing. This section has got an example of the type of writing that this book uses in several places, which is a bad example of writing, where they are telling rather than showing. So instead of describing some of the crazy shit that the orcs and goblins get up to, particularly the goblins, they simply say, with hilarious consequences, And they often do that throughout this book. So saying something is hilarious doesn't make it hilarious. Okay, writing something hilarious that makes people laugh is hilarious. And I found that here it stood out because tonally it was weird, where they're basically going, look at these horrendous, murderous, horrendous, awful, horrendous, terrible, horrendous creatures. There's a green tide coming and it's awful, but they're hilarious. Which shouldn't have been how it was best done. It was just a weird tonal shift.
Yeah, give examples. Yeah.
Give examples. And they had more than enough space to drop a couple of examples for that. But this is, loosely speaking, if you're reading it, something that happens more than once in the book. So rather than saying someone, a great deed is terrible, they'll just say a great deed is terrible. And did evil things, not what they did.
Yep. Cole Patterson, purple orcs. So in 40K, remember the purple orcs are invisible.
Of course.
They're camouflaged if they're purple.
Of course they are. Suddenly realized. I'm an idiot. Should have realized immediately.
Boy, the brain boy's trying to leave us in 40K. The bosses are leaving.
No.
All right. So Tomb Kings, I don't think there's anything we need to really touch in this section. I think almost all of this has remained pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Let me just check my notes, but I'm pretty convinced that my notes just say all of the issues I had before are still here, but there's no real issues. As I recall.
Nice. Succinct.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, they kind of cover everything, but like they covered a lot of this earlier. So it kind of rehashes a lot of what they've already talked about.
As I recall, there was another weird bit in the orc bits where they described the orcs' version of how they viewed elves as strangely fragrant, which I thought was a very weird way to call them out.
So that reminded me of, I remember there being a call out in the I think it's like the 7th edition Greenskin book when they're talking about why goblins have the fear elves rules is because they think elves smell funny. Even though it's actually way more complex than that, but that's a long-standing joke, is the elves smell funny.
That's bullshit. They could have done that better.
Yeah, they could have. But
there's no explanation, so it just read really weird. I see what they're going for there.
Yeah, it's a call out to a joke that they expect you to already know, which is odd.
And if I'm not catching it first time round, it deserves to be properly called out for the bullshit that it is. Mm-hmm. You can't be writing for the fan base if it strikes as weird to someone who's reading it for the first time. Anyway, let's move on to our Tomb Kings, which I think we can just skim. Yes.
Yeah, I think we can kind of just like it goes through all, like I said, the weird thing about this book is it kind of treats the Tomb Kings almost as a main character faction. That in the timeline section, you get a lot of Tomb King stuff. And then when you get to the Tomb Kings, it basically says all the same stuff again.
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, we got ourselves a whole section at the rise of men, and there's the Tomb Kings and the Gash and all this business. And we're getting it again. It's almost like we got ourselves yet more timeline after the timeline before we properly hit the factions. And the factions are neatly laid out until we do this Sigmar.
Yeah, the only thing that's new is like the Gods of the Desert section, which like, okay, cool. But like the rest of this is like literally already covered.
Yeah, it is.
So
yeah, it's fine.
Unnecessary, but neat, I guess. Lost and the Damned. This section pretty much just sets up your Warriors of Chaos. It is very vague. It is super vague.
It does something enormous. In fact, this is the section that changes the Warhammer setting fundamentally. You might miss it. It's a tiny detail, but it's an enormous fucking detail where it says that the 4 Chaos Gods are just 4 of many,
which is awesome.
many gods. In fact, a staggeringly huge pantheon of Chaos Gods. And that is huge because almost everywhere they try to say it's the 4 great powers, that's it, done. And then someone says, but what about that? Is he a Chaos God? Well, he is. He's Chaos God. Fuck. Wait a minute. It's the 4 great Chaos powers and Hashut, I suppose, and maybe others. What about the Horned Rat? Is he? Well, he's not strictly speaking.
Oh, yeah. Or what about this god that goes up in this Black Library book?
What about Zavassin and what about Malal? Oh, fuck. Now we're really getting confused. There's all manner of gods now, and they make it very clear that the 4 great powers are the most powerful ones. And if you want to go back to some of the older lore and say when the Chaos Gods tried to break the world, now you can say There wasn't just 4. There was a lot of them. And you can also say that, for example, the great demon princes that rose by the gates, some of them maybe became full gods like Be'lakor. I'd say Be'lakor now quite clearly is a god, not just simply a demon. There is so much more offered by that tiny, small amount. I'll also note one other detail I liked and one I didn't. One that I liked was they marked Slaanesh as a they, which is about freaking time too, because she who thirsts, or the Prince of Pleasure, is not really a man or a woman. So trying to constantly use gendered language to describe Slaanesh is just a waste of time. What I didn't like, though, was gendering Tzeentch as male, because Tzeentch is nothing. Tzeentch is constant change. Tzeentch should be an it. Not even a they. Tzeentch is definitely not a him. Now, Papa Nurgle being a him, that makes a lot of sense. Khorne is almost always depicted as the Lord of Battle, the God of Blood. Totally cool with that. But depicting Tzeentch as a him just feels weird now. We understand pronouns. Yeah, we understand pronouns much better than we used to. And most of the pronouns for these were established in the 80s when the concepts of using different pronouns really didn't matter. Nowadays, they not only matter, they matter to a lot of people. And you can do it right. It's not hard. They did it right with Slaanesh. Didn't do it right with Tzeentch.
They also did it right with the Slann. The Slann in this book don't have gendered language anymore. The Slann are no longer he's, they are its. Like Lord Croak is referred to as it. Yeah,
as it should be, because neither male nor female, nor really they either. They're quite beyond that, and that's right. And using correct language is important. Our language, it's not that the language has evolved, it's just that we now have the correct terms to describe it. It adds clarity to the text, because we now understand that Slaanesh is not like the others, because Slaanesh is a they, and that's great.
Yeah,
so yeah, really like that.
Yep, they also never use the term. I actually checked through the book. They never use the term Dark Brothers. They always use the other terms, because the Dark Brothers used to be a really common term for the Dark Gods, and they don't use it anymore, which makes sense which
is good because it's a stupid name.
Yeah, but yes, I love that the Chaos Pantheon is now like giant, because that's what it should have been. So great change, awesome change.
A truly awesome, massive change in a section that does exactly what you'd expect on the tin, but with that small difference, everything is nicely rebalance for the Warhammer world in a way that I think is absolutely positive. It does, however, lead me to almost mourn the fact that they never really describe how they're different to the other gods. And they do mention the other gods frequently and a lot. They even mentioned the War of the Gods that happened right at the very beginning of time. That it's mentioned further on in the book when they're discussing Vol and Cain. So it still happens, the War of the Gods. There's a big, huge something that occurs. The Chaos Gods are doing something during this period, and the Cataclysm occurs possibly all at the same time. So it would have been really nice if even there was just a little sidebar that says, oh, it's complicated, isn't it, these gods? And then at least attempting to show that there is theologians, real people in the Warhammer world right now who attempt to understand this shit.
Yeah, but you know what? I will take what I can get.
Yep, I'll take what I can get.
The rest of the Warrior Chaos section is they just tell you what they are.
They do.
It's nothing new.
It isn't.
Beastmen is...
Right, I'm going to call out one thing on the Beastmen, because it does something that almost never happens in the rest of the book. They add, again on layout here, a quotation, not in a sidebar, but sitting against the picture. Okay? Now, I bring that out because clearly they're happy to do that. So why the fuck didn't they do it elsewhere where they had lots of white space, where they could have added flavorful quotations about things that helped new readers understand what it's like to be within the world? They did it there. They've got themselves the Quillmaster of Drakvald, Helios Ghoul, explaining exactly what Beastmen are. And that's quite fun. But the lack of that elsewhere is made all the more present because they added it here. And it does make you going, wait, did they organize all their layout and only use that as an option once? And it appears the answer is, yeah. All the other quotations are handled like this, as sidebars. If I just bring one up for you to see.
Yep.
Yeah. And
like
they really waste space, because that takes up 20% of the page with a huge sidebar with a tiny amount of text and an illustration in it. Not best using the space unless it's a really long one like this one, where you can see it sort of uses the space well. I've got a bit of gleam on my light there. But yeah, I'm just calling out that one because it's worth calling out inside the Beast of the Forest. The Beastmen part, from my side at least,
Beastmen are weird because they actually only get one page.
Yeah, they get, the Horde of Chaos get the other side. Yeah.
Well, no, the Hordes of Chaos is not about them. It's about Asvar Kul. Because it's just the setup to the Great Incursion.
It is. They only get a single page for what is such a arguably. I mean, Chaos has been given short shrift in this book in general.
Yeah, they're not really focused on it at all.
You know, given that they intend to use it as a big bad guy later on the line, it's a bit of a shame that they're not given a bit more meat.
Considering they are a separate playable faction, it is funny to me that the Beastmen got less pages than the Tribes of Chaos do. Like Norska gets more lore than the Beastmen do. Poor Beastmen. Yeah, Estalia got more lore than the Beastmen did. Yeah. Poor Beastmen.
I mean, it's actually a bit crazy.
Forever shit on.
Yeah, there's not an awful lot there other than saying that Beastmen are the children of chaos. I will say that they do add one thing here that I do think it doesn't necessarily change anything, but it is worth stating that they make it clear that Beastmen were around right at the Cataclysm and throughout it, which means they probably formed many of the forces of chaos during those initial years. Now, they would have been in a changeable state. This is perhaps before they stabilized into the Beastmen that we know and love today. But they would have been a part of that. So again, it attacks the concept that the initial hordes of chaos were demons and only demons.
Yeah.
It makes it quite clear that Beastmen were involved. Those who had fallen to chaos, be they from humanity, be they from perhaps even elves, because we know the original anointed, as they were presented in the Slaanesh sections, they are proper ancient. So yeah, there's definitely that feeling here that the version of the first Cataclysm where chaos goes to war with everyone, it's not just demons. And I bring that up because it definitely was described as only demons, and it's why Morcar was removed as the first ever chosen, because everyone realized, oh, wait a minute, we can't have a human ever chosen then, because humanity is not ready for that. It's all demons. They're all demons at this point. Crap! Let's drop Morcar and move him. So they changed the lore entirely to accommodate that. They no longer need to do so. They could easily hike Morcar back.
Yeah, this does reinforce what we talked about during the last stream, where in like the global, because they have so much lore on the Great Cataclysm, weirdly.
Yeah,
which I'm fine with, but it's interesting.
I love it.
where in that part of the book they really hammer on. No, it was the legions of chaos, the hordes of chaos, which was like everybody.
Yep.
Okay, so the last chaos section, which I think is all we're gonna have time for before we're out of time. This section is fucking peak. It is so fucking good. So Norsca,
it's good to end on a positive, isn't it?
Yes. So Norsca gets its own big focus, which they kind of talk about what Norsca is. They talk about the governance and how it works. But the thing that jumped out at me that I fucking absolutely loved is that the Norskins are not played off as evil.
Chaos.
They are distinct. Where they're not in the chaos section. And it even talks about that for all their warlike nature, they will unify against common enemies. And a tribal councils have been called, which a king and queens of the various tribes will set aside their differences to unite against a shared foe. Should this happen, they'll usually pick the eldest king or queen or the most powerful tribe. And then it specifies that when the armies of chaos gather to invade the old world, sometimes the Norskins count amongst their number. The tribes that dwell in the furthest north almost always do, because they lie closer to the realm of chaos and are tainted more by its shadow. But they also talk about in the section before that how they trade and they're at peace with a lot of different nations. And it's like the Norskins are interesting and they're doing things.
So this is a return to what the Norskins always were. Always were. They had been pretty much throughout the course of Warhammer's many editions. If we go to, say, Manowar back in the 90s, the Norse fleet were not a chaos fleet at all. They were just a bunch of longships and kingships that, by the way, kicked ass because Norse were really good in close combat. Loads of fun there. The Norse in 3rd edition were just their own army, Viking army. But as Warhammer adapted and moved on through 4th, 5th, and then definitely into 6th, Norsca became the land of chaos because it was close to the realm of chaos up to the north. And effectively, all the Norse language turned into chaos language, and they became chaos marauders. They effectively became the chaos marauders. And many of the chaos marauder models were loosely styled of Norse iconography and feeling, a real world Norse at that. And that was a loss, a massive loss, particularly because the role-playing game continued with the Norse having a great deal more character. If, for example, we go to the Tome of Corruption, to the second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I helped develop that book. And in there, the Norse have got a complete society where the Chaos gods are just a part of their pantheon, because the gods are just lying up there. The Weeping Eye is just beyond the horizon, and those gods are a part of their lives. And some tribes, some clans, some groups, some family units, they not only worship them, they were very conversant with the dangers of not being aware of those gods and doing what must be right. But others were not just open traders, they were out doing the thing. Now, the important thing was some of them were both chaos worshippers and also worshippers of gods of things like Tal and Ulrich et al., as well, simultaneously being traders too, because for them, the chaos gods were just a reality they had to appease. Now, the word worshipper here is the important one. It's not so much they worshipped them, they feared them. You had to appease the chaos gods because the chaos gods were fickle and angry.
And they're also
they were
right there.
And they're there. To ignore them is absolute folly. To pretend they don't exist is stupid. To do things that avoid the attention of the eye of the ruinous powers that lie from beyond makes sense. And this section, to cut a long story short, takes everything that had been written in a variety of books and said, you know what? Yeah, the Norse aren't just chaos worshippers. They are another human society that has been constantly stymied and held back by the great horror that lies to their north. But many of them have not just survived, they've thrived. And they've continued to trade, they've continued to tour the world, and they have gone around the world. They've got traders that have spread about all over the place. And that's just, I think, brilliant.
Well, it's fucking awesome. Like on the next page, it talks about that, you know, the original Norse got kicked out by Sigmar. But it talks about
because I wrote that bit.
Yeah. Many of the tribes of Norsca are not just raiders, they're great traders and merchants, they're explorers. Then there's one that talks about how there's Norscan colonies all across the world. Many are peaceful places populated by travelers and adventurers that settle into a more hospitable climate. Awesome. It talks about how there are, I fucking love this, that there are Norscan colonies in Empire, Bretonnian, and Kislev, of course, including Erengrad and Kislev, which is interesting. But then that there are Norscan colonies in Lustria, Talea, Araby, Cathay, Koresh, and Nippon. Whoa!
I particularly like seeing Koresh being marked as a realm, not just as an open place that isn't really its own discrete
the hinterlands. Yeah.
Okay, exactly. This is Koresh now. This is a place. And that, for me, was just brilliant. So, cut a long story short, the Norse fucking rock, and they should. This is what the Norse, for me, have always been, and it's an absolute delight to see it actually come to the page, and in a way that not only doesn't contradict any previous lore, it takes it all in and drops it down. The only thing that I would say is a proper contradiction is bringing out Erengrad as a colony of the Norse. It is very much an Ungol city in the previous lore. It was indeed where the Ungols held out right to the very end against the Gospodars and where they withdrew to. And there's a great hag, the Hag of the Sea, that sits out in the ocean out there that was driven into the waters because of that.
Yeah, that could still be true. It could just be that the founding of the city was by a Norscan colony.
Yeah, I can live with that. That'll do. And I think that, I think that works quite well. I'm cool.
Only last two things I'll point out. They do specifically mention skinwolves and shapeshifters for the Norskins, which is cool. So if Norskins, which this seems to imply will be their own tabletop army, I suspect they'll have skinwolves and other maybe werebears and other cool shit. Then the Albion sidebar is super fucking interesting, and it's gonna be the last thing we talk about for today. So the Albion sidebar talks about Albion and the island next to it, Hybrasil. Which is fascinating because it mentioned that there are twisted hags that live in some of these places, and they hang out with one-eyed swamp-dwelling creatures. So we've got our Famir. The Famir
Yeah, we've got the Fem.
baby.
Yeah, indeed, they're definitely, they are not called out by name, but that they are there, and they're marked as being inhabitants of Albion, and I'm cool with that. I think in terms of their overall origin, it makes the most sense anyway. So yeah, just calling out the name High Brazil. It's a very, very common name for an island that was believed to exist off of Scotland or the UK in general, out in the hinterlands. High Brazil pops up in a few movies as well, as an island that has been lost that they tried to find. It was on a lot of medieval maps from around about the 1300s all the way up to the 1700s, and then just vanished. So that's super fun.
Hi, Quick Jen. Thank you very much for the happy birthday and the bits and stuff. And Lindsay, yeah, I will say, I think honestly, one of my favorite bits of this is a completely random aside. One of my favorite bits of the Sigmar trilogy by Graham McNeil is the end of the second book, where you get to see Sigmar and all of his guys. They're chasing after oh my god, what's the Demon Prince? The Sludge Demon Prince.
Azazel?
Yeah, Azazel.
No.
Yeah. So they're chasing him, but they've tracked him to a Norscan village, and like you see from the Norscan's perspective, Sigmar and his people just coming in and massacring the village, and it's fucking brutal. Like it is nightmarishly brutal. They kill everybody, like women, children. They fucking massacre everybody. It's fucking awful, and it's one of the best parts of that book because it really shows that like there is some dark fucking, like when you're looking at Sigmar from another perspective, like he was a barbarian king first and foremost. Which is good. Like that, it adds nuance to that whole relationship and that character. But anyway, we're out of time.
We are. That was good. I think we got through quite a bit there. So looking at what we've got left, there's not much left in terms of the background of the book here. But there is a hell of a lot left in terms of the overall book. Not just because there's lots of little sidebars, but I'll say that as a point of focus for our next one, I think moving on to magic is worthwhile doing.
Yeah,
what do you think?
We'll wrap up Kislev and Cathay because there are discussions that need to be had there. One that's not as fun with Cathay or Kislev, and then one that's very fun with Cathay.
Agreed on both counts.
And then from there we'll hop into magic, and that'll probably take the entire stream, I would guess.
So do a quick advertisement for that. Don't miss the magic one because by the gods, this is going to be fascinating. It's a really good change and a really interesting change, which both keeps a lot of the old lore, adds a little bit of new, and also mixes things up a little bit in a way that just makes me go, well, that's an interesting choice. I wonder why you did that. So it's going to be a super fascinating shot. That one will be over on the Lawhammer channels next week. So if you've managed to reach the end of our lovely stream here and you don't yet realize that we play on both streams, we don't just sit on my YouTube or Sotek's YouTube channels. We go week by week by week, one side over to the other. So part 3 of our old world breakdown will be over on the Lawhammer channels. And if you're sitting out there going, you know what, I would really like to give Sotek a little present. There's lots of things you can do. Go share his stream somewhere.
Go subscribe to Lawhammer. That would be my best birthday present. Go subscribe to the Lawhammer channel. I put out the quick video.
I was going to say, I was going to say something a little bit nicer, and that you should subscribe to him. Obviously, share his channel's places, get him up to 100,000 users, or if you do happen to be someone who's flush, throw a quick super chat or a subscription to one of his channels. That would obviously go down very well with him because he tells me, now this may sound controversial to you, but he tells me he likes to eat.
You would never guess by all the extra me that I have that I don't need. You would never guess.
So that was super fun. Thanks, all. I'm really looking forward to next week. And I suppose that's us done.
Yeah, I do want to do a quick last minute. Just thank you all very, very much. Ton of generosity. I really appreciate it. There was a lot of gift subs and even gift memberships on YouTube. I know we don't call those out specifically because like there's a lot of them. So I just want to thank you all very, very much. I did see them. So I do appreciate all that. And I just found out that my Wolfrip stream or campaign got canceled today because our GM is dealing with volcanic eruptions in Iceland. So
oh no. I have always said that if anyone foolish enough to live in Iceland is going to die of a volcano, just ask Lindsay. I say it all the time. It's going to happen.
I'll be sure to pass that on.
Yep,
But,
it's true.
So I will be streaming later today. I'm gonna take a lunch break and then bonus stream today. That'll be fun. So
Yay!
In any event, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. Join us next week as we will be wrapping up the core book.
Finally!
3 fucking streams. But
3 good streams though. I've really enjoyed these.
Great streams, yeah. But we will talk to you all later. So take care. And I'm gonna remember to close this out. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.